Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Frivolous Gravitas. Today, we will be talking about inflation, also known as the hidden tax, which is kind of which way we're going to be taking it. Inflation is something that keeps being talked about over and over and over and over and over in the news. And I know my wife doesn't understand it. I only marginally understand it, but luckily we have Kris here who has a better understanding of it than me and my wife put together. So that's why we're going to talk with him about it. So Kris, just let's get going.
Thank you, Jordan.
What is inflation?
Sorry, I jumped the gun there.
Oh, sorry. I was doing that whole dramatic pause that probably seemed really bad. It feels really good to say it. But then when it probably gets on YouTube, it's like, man, that guy's such a cringy weirdo.
I think you stroked my ego a little bit too much, thinking that I know twice or as much as both of you combined. But we'll see what we can get through, and hopefully we can all come to same playing field. I guess basically we'll just start with an explanation of inflation, because I think it's really poorly defined in the news when they do talk about it. By they, I mean the media, but also the government and politicians and businesses and investors. Like, they means literally everybody who manages money and actually tracks inflation. So to start, inflation is essentially just the increase of prices domestically, and it's intended to be a broad scope thing that encompasses all goods that people consume on a regular basis. So not necessarily luxury items, but like ticket items like bread and eggs and, shoes, socks, clothes, that kind of thing, gas. It's calculated by using the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, and the PPI, which is the Purchasing Price Index. And that's comprised of data compiled by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, I think, BLS. Yeah.
Okay, go on.
So the CPI uses a basket of goods, and that's prepared by composing a list of retail and service prices of regional urban markets. And they use roughly like 80,000 or so data points every month that they collect, the BLS that is. Certain items are given more or less weight based on the inclinations or the best subjective judgments of the governing bodies, but also by the market influencers like lobbyists or billionaires. And the reason for that is wealthy people, or people who have control of large pools of wealth, they have sway in the markets because the volume of the capital shifting its weight from one side to the other is sufficient to move markets on its own. So that's really important to note, is that there are groups and entities out there who with their own assets can change, and it's not manipulation, it's just they own so much of the pool of wealth that they can move their money and cause prices to change in the directions that they're moving their money. That means when they're selling a lot of assets, prices are going to fall for everybody, not just for them. But as they're selling it, the price continues to fall. And as they're buying things up, prices continue to rise.
Okay, can we labor that a bit?
Yeah, for sure.
We have all these groups, so these CPI and the PPI essentially are just bodies tracking what the price of everything is. So we have because the market kind of sets its own prices through supply and demand. So we have to be able to actually see where the prices so that we can see the price of everything. So
well, one correction is the CPI and PPI aren't bodies. They're not like groups. Those are indicators. They're numbers that are compiled using an algorithm.
Okay,
the algorithm is based on a basket of goods, and that basket of goods is what's subjective by a group that's putting it together, which is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics.
Right. So then this algorithm weights things, but a company can come up to you and say, no, I want my oil or something, because you're an oil magnet, comes up to you and says, well, oil is really important, so we want you to give it more because people are, say, maybe going to be using more oil in the next, supply and demand is going to change in the spring because people use more oil in the spring or something, or in the fall. And so you need to weight that more heavily during this time period because, they might know something that the algorithm doesn't.
Generally, what they'll do with that is just gas prices, not oil itself, because most of oil isn't going to gas. Gas, like a barrel of oil, is split into its constituent parts. So you get like kerosene from part of it. So you get like jet fuel and fighter fuel.
Yeah,
lower down in the
mineral spirits.
Lower down, you'll get plastics and urethanes and like polymers and things like that used in construction and waterproofing membranes and things like that. And then further down the barrel, you'll get like diesel and gas for your car and things like that. So usually they'll account a consumer good as the gas for the car. But even though you're making clothes out of polyester, which is made out of oil, they'll calculate the rise in price of the clothes as opposed to the barrel of oil. So oil is usually excluded except for parts of it. They don't weight it more heavily. They actually weight oil less heavily. And another reason they do that is because OPEC itself is a cartel and they set the prices of oil. Not directly, but they set the production. Everybody colludes and agrees. Like all the countries come together and say, hey, you can produce an extra 20,000 barrels a month. You can produce 60,000 barrels more a month. Or they'll all agree that there's too much supply and they don't want to compete with each other and drive the prices so low that they all become bankrupt. So they'll all say like, okay, let's all cut production by 10% each. So even though they produce at different rates, usually they try and do some type of organized price fixing in the market. And OPEC's mandate is to stabilize prices. But if you look at an oil market chart, you can tell that they're woefully inadequate at it. But they're essentially a legal cartel. But
but something like
the basket of goods in the CPI would be more like eggs, flour, shoes, socks. They don't include real estate, which is a really important note too. And I want to get to the Evergrande crisis later on in the episode, because real estate is a huge, huge factor of affordability and spending power in people's lives, and that's not even factored into inflation, which is a major problem with it. But I'll get into the problems with it after I describe it a bit better.
Right.
So when prices rise, obviously businesses are earning more money per sale, but that also means that their employees, who are customers of many other businesses, also have to spend more on everything they consume to survive. And that's that basket of goods that they use for the CPI. Thusly, the employees will eventually have to demand higher wages in order to compensate for the higher prices of all the goods that they have to buy. But the demand for the higher wages comes after the price rises. So usually the prices will rise first and then wages will rise after, if they raise at all. And that really doesn't benefit the people, but that delay in having to pay out higher wages and being able to charge more for their products, the gap between the lag is what makes businesses more profitable through inflation.
Wouldn't consumption go down before wages start to go up? So prices go up, then consumption would tend to go down. It would probably go down differently for different products because, people will still buy milk and eggs but if they go up, if you go to the store and all of a sudden the egg is now, it's from $12, the carton of eggs is now $300, you're like,
yeah, and that's what the CPI does. It factors in only goods that people consume on a regular basis. Okay. That's like its point. So it's things that people already do buy monthly, even if the prices go up or not.
Okay.
So that's sort of its own point, is to measure that specific type of spending and consumerism. So you don't really have a choice not to buy food. You don't have a choice not to buy clothes.
So we do this in history where we try and track the price of a loaf of bread to see generally an equal amount to see the value of their money and to see the spending power of like the peasants and stuff.
Right.
This is the same thing, but in our time and not trying to push us into the past.
Yeah, and bread's a fantastic metric because you make it from wheat, and wheat is really easy to grow in huge volumes, and it takes very little processing to make flour, and it takes very little energy to make bread. So finding the price of the cheapest necessary good is an awesome baseline for all prices of everything else in a market after that. So the only time wages rise faster is if more people own and operate their own businesses and they charge higher prices in tandem with the inflation, and they decide to pay themselves more whenever they please. Those are the only people, like individual consumers, who actually benefit from inflation. But the benefit they're getting is technically just borrowing from tomorrow, and then you borrow from tomorrow and pay it back, and borrow from tomorrow and pay it back. Like, you're not actually getting ahead. It's just a perception of getting ahead. because that money, like the hens still come home to roost. You still need to pay for it. But the business owners will get tax reliefs, and that reduces the burden of higher prices even further, and the need for them to earn higher incomes to pay for the higher prices of goods, because they're not paying as much in taxes, so less of their income is being taken away from them. So businesses also have the added benefit of timing and control of cash flow, where employees are required to wait for their master's permission to consent to charge the firm or raise their wages or provide company paid inducements like travel or material prizes or things like that. So as a business owner, people still have the flexibility of as if they had a higher income and lower prices, but employees and consumers and just regular day people, the average common folk, they're the ones paying the interest on this future loan, because they're paying higher prices now before their wages go up. And that's basically the same as interest on a debt, but they're paying the interest first and they're not getting the loan. The businesses are getting the loan because they're getting to charge more first before they pay out more in wages.
Right. And the government wins because they're getting more sales tax, in theory.
Yeah, and not just sales tax, they're getting income tax too. So as wages rise, they raise the lowest tax brackets for income tax too, and then people's wages go up, so there's a higher percentage of their wages come back as tax. And most people are taxed at like 30 to 35% marginal tax rate, like all things considered. Just at the end, what you've earned and what you actually paid out, you get a fraction from that, and that's your marginal tax rate. That number is like 3 times higher than business tax rates, because businesses can write off a whole bunch of other expenses. And they can move money more freely so that they can avoid taxes just by deferring it to the next year and deferring it to the next year while still maintaining control of the assets and the wealth that it's produced. Most people don't spend every dollar they earn. You try and put some away, you invest some of it, you stuff some in your mattress or whatever. But
I've got a jar full of coins right there. But so I feel like I'm missing one thing though, because why would the prices go up? So the prices go up. The CPI and the PPI track this by looking at the goods. And so then people start paying that. After a while, wages are demanded, then wages go up. So things are getting more expensive. But what would make the prices go up in the first place for these goods? Say all of a sudden, well, I guess it could be anything, right? So like if you have a loaf of bread, then there could be like a storm in the Midwest or just and then all of a sudden there's less wheat in the market. So because of supply and demand, the wheat becomes more valuable for the bread makers and all the other people that use wheat. And then so they have to pay more. But it's
mostly complicated because of human intervention. So stuff like that would make sense. But in order to stabilize the price of wheat, the government subsidizes it so that farmers don't ever go bankrupt, so that we always have a food supply chain. So there's like a floor on how much wheat can go down. And then from that, taxpayers will pay the rest. And again, the bulk of most people's income, like a third of everybody's income, is going to taxes, and a third is going to rent, which goes to a landlord who doesn't pay nearly as much taxes. So the distribution and the cash flow, like the velocity of money, is very skewed towards one end of the spectrum.
So if there's too much wheat on the other side of the supply and demand, and the price goes down, and the farmers aren't going to make as much, so the government gives them money in order to make up for the loss in because they're essentially banking on the market. You grow a field of wheat, you expect to sell it at a certain price to make a profit, right? So no matter what, the farmers will be subsidized, so it doesn't matter what they grow. But then for the consumer, the taxes are taken into account because we're still paying those taxes. And so the price of wheat into we're paying for the wheat and the subsidies.
So one of the most crucial factors in figuring out what the consumer price index will do and how prices will change is the central bank's interest rates. So when the interest rate of the central bank changes, it changes the rate at which people are investing and buying into your currency, and your currency valuation changes. So there's all kinds of different dynamics at play here because you're talking about international trade, and everybody's country has their own trade system, and all of those currencies are valued based on a relationship between each other. They're not valuable just on their own. A Canadian dollar is useless to somebody if they can't convert a Canadian dollar into US dollars, because then you can't do trade in the States, right? So when a central bank changes the rates, that has a way bigger effect than just an environmental thing, unless there's like an environmental catastrophe, like California's wildfires and stuff like that. Like that actually destroys property that produces goods, like farms and things. So once a farm is destroyed, you can't just turn it on after the winds blow, right? Whereas with a drought, once water comes, you can sort of feed the crops again and everything starts growing.
Well, in the 30s, what would happen was the Dust Bowl would actually blow away a lot of the topsoil sometimes. So, but again, you can just put down more soil and you've still got a farm. Whereas if it burns down, your equipment is destroyed, all of your investments, all of your silos, all of your storage, everything is gone. You got nowhere to live while you're working on your farm either. So destruction is far, far worse than just an event of climate. Or what do you call that? A weather event. Yeah.
So the idea with inflation is that it stimulates growth. And that's sort of the reason the government pushes for a small, moderate inflation target. I should have put up, Bank of Canada website, I think it's just bankofcanada.ca. They describe all this too. So if you want to get further into detail in it, they'll explain better than I will because I don't believe what they say, but I'll try and steelman argument what their ideas are. Essentially, they want a small, modest inflation, price rises, because that discourages people from hoarding money, from saving money. And that sounds stupid because it is stupid, but the reasoning they give is if you spend money that you have instead of just sitting on it, you'll invest it in things that produce more goods, and that money will serve a purpose to stimulate the economy, and growth is their big target number, right? Everybody wants to get bigger, but bigger isn't necessarily better. If you're already producing enough goods that all the people want, getting bigger doesn't help anybody unless it makes prices go down, but prices will go down because you've got huge inventories you're trying to get rid of because nobody's buying your extra stuff. So growth only matters if you've got customers you can't serve because you're so busy, but you don't have enough employees or equipment or time or whatever the case is. But in the idea of the government and the central bank, what they want to do is tell people to invest. And
so this is what you're describing is the bank is trying to get us increase the velocity of money, as you said before.
Yeah.
So like I've got that jar of coins on there. Honestly, there's probably a couple $100 in loonies and toonies and
they hate that.
Oh yeah, because it's just sitting there. And honestly, it is losing value as times go, especially when I'm not spending it during COVID. I should really go spend stuff. I should go buy food or ammunition or something. It's
only losing value because of inflation. If there were no inflation, it would sit there and it would be just as valuable today as when you use it a year or 10 years from now.
Right. So they want me to go and spend that because that's all the money in all those jars and savings accounts and, checking account that someone's fastidiously saving up for, maybe school or, a car, their first car or something or anything like that. All these wonderfully romantic ideas I can come up with, or drugs. I don't know. Maybe they're being a good drug addict and I'm going to save up for all my drugs. Okay, whatever.
Responsible drug addicts.
But all that money pulled together would actually probably end up being quite a big sum. And so if that money was infused into the market, say I go buy paint, and now the paint company and Canadian Tire can go and input that and hire maybe another employee and do that, all that kind of stuff. So that money increases, that money's velocity is increased and the volume of money moving around is increased. Therefore, there's more room, there's more money to invest, and therefore there's more growth in theory. is what the Bank of Canada is describing, which makes sense when you say it out loud, but what's wrong with that?
Okay, well, the issue with inflation is that it's like borrowing from tomorrow under someone else's name in order to be richer today by the metrics used to evaluate wealth, but not in real spending power standards of said wealth. So it only actually makes a business richer if it keeps increasing prices every year. If you do it just 1 year, then you have to make up for it the next year with a stagnant price, and you're no further ahead, right? So as long as you keep doing it every single year, you're constantly getting this benefit of spending now is better than saving. So the government's caught between two minds, because on the one hand, they want a safety net for people who crash and burn or whatever, and their companies fail or they lose their job and they're unemployed. So on the one hand, they want people to have savings, but nothing they do encourages people or promotes them to have savings. Everything costs people money. So like if you put money into a savings account and get 1% per year, but the government's actively pushing through policy and the central bank's actively changing rates to drive inflation up to 2%, they're forcing your money to lose value on purpose.
1% minus 1% per year.
Yeah, and because spending makes bigger numbers, and bigger numbers look good. But bigger numbers aren't always better. If I have 10 ice cream cones, it doesn't make me any happier than if I had 9 ice cream cones. 1 ice cream cone makes me really happy though.
So if there's an interest rate of 2% per year and I have $1,000 and I'm getting interest of 1%, I'm losing minus 1% per year. So I'm losing, what was it, $10?
Yeah.
But so that's $10 per year, but that's pennies too. So, but when it's pennies, so I'm losing that much money per year, but it looks like on the books, it's saying that the Canadian market is gaining 2%. So they're artificially saying that the economy grew 2% because we have 2% more money.
Yeah. And it's not a reflection of people's spending power, because now everything's more than 2% more expensive because profit margins are based on percentages. So if the price of something goes up $10, then the market value goes up 30% of $10. So the company makes more money, everything costs more money, people have less savings, but the country, the government, gets to show a graph that shows an upward trend. And that's what they do to get elected. And then therein lies the problem, is inflation is a political means. It has nothing to do with the benefit of the people. Pushing for inflation is something that you do when you want to fudge the numbers, basically, obfuscate reality. And it's deceiving people into thinking that they're getting richer when they get pay increases, especially with minimum wage increases, because costs are always passed on to consumers. No business runs and just doesn't make a profit. Every company has to make a profit. So if they employ somebody, they have to make money on the people they're employing. And that means that all of their supply chains and all of those employees also have to make money and increase their margins on all the goods that they produce and distribute and sell. So the complication with using a CPI that doesn't factor in cost of living is that people with more than $100 in a change jar, that 1% difference is like more than a year's salary of other people. That 1% difference is nothing compared to the 13% that the real estate values appreciated, or the rent increases of 5 to 6%. And the government limits how much your rent can increase, but the limit to the rent increases is higher than inflation. And inflation doesn't count real estate, which is what your rent is based on. So it's absolutely asinine to consider that it's good for all the public and the population, inflation. It's only good for business, and businesses are the largest contributors to campaigns. So again, it's politics.
Right. So I don't know if you're done with this, but I was thinking, what mechanism do they use to actually increase the inflation?
Well, the central bank interest rates are the easiest to point out, because as soon as you change the interest rate, there's an inverse correlation to it. Okay. And then I might want to ask, because I keep hearing about, well, the most famous example in history is, we just print more money. See the Mississippi bubble, and John Law, not John Locke, John Law, I think it was John. And he essentially
what happened in France in the 18th century was, and this happened to Britain too, but it was more spectacular. It was more spectacular under France. Was that there was investment in this new land in Louisiana called Mississippi. It's going to be this. It was touted as being this wonderfully fertile farmland. Now, if anyone's seen pictures of Mississippi or seen one movie in the bayou, they know that this is not good farmland. It's not good land to, colonialize, to start a city on, to do really much on, especially if you're in those old days. So everyone was investing in this. And so what happened was, when everyone found out how terrible it was, and when the expedition, the colonial expedition failed, all that money fell through. So it was all the money invested from all over the country failed. And so the government was out of money because they invested a ton of money in this and they had lost it. And so they needed to print money. And so they started printing money. And then there was a run on the banks, where everyone in Paris and a lot of the rich people literally went into the bank and asked for their money back, which the government didn't have. So in order to pay them back, they printed money. Now this is a lot like what you're saying, where because there's more money, the price of money decreases. Money also abides by the laws of supply and demand. If there's more of it, it's not worth as much because everyone has it. And
so with that example, there's a few issues that conflate the subject, and I'm not trying to defer it. I actually want to get to it, but we'll get to that under talking about bonds and the Evergrande thing, because when the government doesn't technically print money, what they do is they issue bonds, and the central bank gives the money for the bonds. And the bond is basically saying that all these people living in this country have to pay taxes. We'll pay you back in tax money. But again, it's future money. So every time they print money is just like a business raising the prices before they pay higher wages. You're borrowing from tomorrow and you're charging the customer the interest.
Right.
Just like inflation. So it's the same concept, but it's a completely different structure and a different set of words and everything. So that's sort of why I wanted to bundle the two together in this episode, is to talk about inflation and bonds, because they have the same structure, but they talk about them completely differently.
That does help make sense, because if you take out a bond, then you're essentially creating that money out of nowhere, but in anticipation of future growth. But if the country doesn't grow, like say over COVID, then that money isn't supporting any actual growth, and therefore doesn't have any it doesn't have any, there's no value that it represents in the market.
Right, and the value that you're talking about in the currency is actually like an exchange value between countries. So it's not that the money itself isn't worth anything in their own country. No. It's that the country money is worthless to other countries. And a country like Zimbabwe that's entirely dependent on imports, that's catastrophic. As soon as you can't exchange your money internationally and you need an import, you're screwed. But a country like Canada is actually completely different. Because in Canada, if our money was reduced to absolutely zero, we have energy supplies, we have raw resources, we have spare land to build factories and stuff, and we have competent labor. So even if our Canadian dollar went down to absolutely zero, like the mark in Germany did after the war or whatever, we'd still have an economy. And rather than make a new bill, we'd just use the same bills we already had, and we'd just reprice everything based on supply and demand locally.
Right, because we're part. Is this allowed? Not allowed, but is this possible because we are integrated into a global system itself? Because a lot of what Germany was doing post World War I and during World War II was had a kind of an insular economy. There was investment from the outside, but a lot of what they were trying to do was, I guess, more of a mercantilism.
But the problem was the purchasing power of their money went to war and destruction of things. That's the problem with the mark didn't go down because it wasn't usable or you couldn't trade with it. It went down because they spent it on stupid things that don't produce more money.
See our last episode.
Yeah. So If you only do it for 1 year, like I said before, then the next year it shows up as a reduction of income. It's just like paying back a loan reduces the money in your bank account. But there's an interest payment that you pay. Either that's in the value of time that you've lost in having that money, or it's like a literal interest payment, like a bond. Every time you issue a bond, even to the central bank, you have to pay an interest on it. That interest amount is money that didn't exist before. So that's the money that's being created into existence, is the interest payments. The loan gets repaid, so that money, it gets added to the supply of money, but then it's removed after the bond's matured. But the interest is never accounted for. That's just money that came out of nowhere. You've paid extra into a bond or a loan. Every time you pay interest, that's money that didn't exist. And the way our banks work right now, the reason why it's possible to have a run on the bank is that we don't actually have reserve requirements sufficient to repay people's deposits. So one of the biggest problems, and again, this system models perfectly what inflation is trying to do with pricing power. Banks will receive a deposit and they're allowed to lend out 10 times more money than they actually have in reserve. So that means when you deposit $10 into the bank, they can lend out, or they can leverage out 9 of it to somebody else, or lend out 9 of it to somebody else. Somebody else can then spend 4 of it and put $5 in the bank, and then that other bank can then lend out $4 more.
Right, which makes sense because they're expecting growth in the market to such an extent that they can say, well, this money will be worth more later, so I'll lend you the hypothetical, the leveraged amount, which they create, I guess. And they,
yeah, that's money created out of thin air.
So they leverage your $1 into 10, and then they lend out a couple to another person in expectation that in the future, it'll actually be worth that much because of growth. So they're saying, well, no, it's worth this now, but it'll be worth this later. So I might as well just use that money now. And so,
but the bank's only business model is fees and interest.
Right.
The only operations they do as a business, unlike a plumber who plumbs or a carpenter who cuts wood, the bank's only job is to thank you for your money. I'm going to lend out 10 times more of it to someone else.
Right.
And then charge an interest. And that interest, again, is created out of thin air. That money is money that wasn't earned in the economy. It wasn't based on a sale that was exported to another country or gold bars or anything like that. It's literally just, you're paying me for giving me your money so that I can give it to somebody else.
In the expectation that other people's work will make this dollar worth more.
But the bank doesn't even care. If you lose all your money, you still owe the bank. So they really don't even care what happens to it. They just want to make sure they get their money back.
Right. I'm kind of, sorry, I keep getting hooked on this.
No, it's fine. It's complicated.
This induction point where, the market's been growing and it will continue to grow, and therefore we can do wacky things with money. But that's inductive reasoning. And so far, honestly, for the last actually quite a while, except for a few bumps in 2008, 2009, it seemed like that was that was good math. But
until you look at consumer debt, like as soon as you chart consumer debt over the last 7 decades, you can see that it correlates exactly with the market rise. People are broker than they've ever been because they have more debt than they've ever had, but they also have more stuff, but that's because spending was increased to stimulate the economy. So they're encouraging, it's like using a credit card. When a teenager has a credit card and they run up the card and it's like 18% or whatever, the banks love that. They do that on purpose, like an 18% credit card and telling you like Visa commercials and shit that say, oh, go buy all the things you want. You can have that nice life you've always earned and worked hard for. But what they're doing, though, is the same thing as the government saying we want inflation and stimulating business growth. Regardless of whether there's customers there to buy things, they just want people to produce more. And the idea is that if we have an overproduction, we can just sell it abroad. And exports are awesome for a company's economy or a country's economy. And that's what the government really wants is exports.
Except we don't produce or export much anymore. We've moved that all elsewhere.
We're exporting raw resources. Like we're not adding value to our resources before we're selling them. So we're basically just like dumping the mine in someone else's hands, which is what the US did during the colonial periods and stuff when they took over countries' governments and deposed leaderships. It was to gain control or favorable trade treaties or secure assets in other countries or footholds militarily, things like that to benefit the country in the long term.
Well, and the same with the United States during the Civil War. That's what made the North such an economic powerhouse. Beside the fact that everyone owned their own labor, that's another story. But sorry, just got to get a quip against slavery in there. But they were adding that value. They were a manufacturing base, whereas the South was a resource-driven base. You know, cotton, tobacco, and that other thing, sugar, and they were just exporting that to Europe mostly.
But because of Europe's control, Europe got favorable rates on all of that cotton and sugar and everything. So they're the benefactors. The people that were working in the States didn't really get very rich off it. But the price of cotton...
only the owners did.
Yeah, but even the owners didn't, like, relatively speaking, an owner today becomes Jeff Bezos. Like billions and billions of dollars. Like so rich that you couldn't even buy enough mansions to spend all your money. Those people never had that kind of... They had one nice big estate. They had probably the newest horses and the nicest carriages and fancy clothes. They lived like millionaires. But like today, a millionaire is just somebody who owns a house. It's totally different.
Well, that's actually a pretty good example of inflation there. A house is a good, and you mentioned that it doesn't, but like the price of a house, like Megan keeps looking at houses, and she showed me one this morning. It's like $500,000, and it's not a fancy or big house.
Actually, for context, that's a really good point to point out too. Then, China right now, and again, we'll get into the Evergrande stuff later. But like China right now, in Shenzhen or Shanghai or Hong Kong or something, to buy a house, it's like 25 years of somebody's average income.
Well, you don't buy it. You have custody of it for 80 years or something.
Yeah, but I mean, it's close enough to buying it.
Yeah.
So but it's 25 years of the average income to buy a house in Shenzhen or somewhere like that. In New York, which is one of the most expensive cities in the world, London, New York, and Vancouver and Toronto, like they're about 25. Tokyo is super expensive.
Apparently San Francisco's still getting expensive, even though it's...
San Francisco's insane, yeah.
Yeah.
But like New York City is only 8 years. London is like 13 years of an average income to buy a house in London. And like these are notorious worldwide for how expensive it is to buy a house. And like you said, you're not even buying the house in China. You're getting a 99-year lease on a place that costs you 25 years of an average income.
Yeah.
Like that's insane. But that's again like a hallmark of a bubble, right? Insanity.
Yeah.
So unless... Okay, yeah, there is one caveat I should make. The employees who aren't earning more money or who have that delay in their wage increases, if they have investments, which are preferentially taxed and require no additional time or labor from the employee to generate more wealth, then those investment holdings of the employee will benefit from the business's increased profit margins from the inflated prices. So they will see higher stock values for the businesses they own shares in, having taken out like public loans, which is the increase in prices, is basically a loan on future productivity. If they do that without having to pay interest on that money, which is like the lag in wage increases, then the employee benefits from the dividend that the stock pays out. But the dividend is only a small fraction of the profit, right? So they're getting something, which is better than nothing, and it's not taxed as much as their salaried income. But I mean, it's pennies compared to the executives and CEOs who are actively manipulating the price of their shares and paying themselves bonuses on shares. They pay themselves with shares to get money that's not taxable, or deferred tax and reduced tax. Capital gains tax is only half of the income is calculated as part of your income. So, but the other thing with stocks and shares that pay dividends is that you can leverage them to buy other stocks and shares. You can borrow from them because they're secured investments. And that's sort of where you get this runaway factor, where the inflation hasn't run away yet, but the wealth gain has run away. And that's what Occupy Wall Street was trying to say. They failed miserably, but they were trying to communicate that the wealth gap was caused by the rules and implementations of the structure of the system. It wasn't about like elitists and trying to steal the money of billionaires or say that, you know, bankers are worthless people. We need
We were
finance.
saying that.
We need people in finance. We need bankers. We need loans. We need somebody to say, "Okay, you're definitely not worth $100,000. Like, I'm not giving you money just to start a paper route." Like, you need somebody saying who's getting the money and who's not.
Yeah.
But the issue is the compensation isn't commensurate with the added value to the system that they're working in. To make $500,000 because your spreadsheet gave you a calculation that any idiot could have just opened the spreadsheet and looked at, but you're getting paid for writing the formula.
Right.
To get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars when a farmer gets 150,000 and the farmer feeds an entire city, like that's not even close to the same.
Well, I think what a lot of people don't like is they have this Rousseauist vision where like all of this stuff that we're talking about, it's just like, it's all too confusing. Just burn it down. They're screwing me over. And yeah, to some extent they are, but I don't know. A lot of what we wanted to do in Occupy was illegal, and immoral, but.
But it was just an anger. And
yes,
because the system's so confusing, you can't really blame people for not having a direction to point their anger at. They just knew they were being abused, and the system's so complicated they didn't know how. Well, that's a problem with the system. You can't put up false walls and barriers to entry if the money is owned by the people who are earning productive, like they are the economy. Right? The money belongs to the people. The government's just managing it for the people. The wealth of the country is based on the productivity and wealth of all the people in the country. It has nothing to do with banks. Right?
Right. There's an element of trust in the market, and
that's
more
the difference
trust there is in the market, the more everyone's going to profit from it, because if everyone trusts the market, then that's not just like, oh, everything will be fine. It's because they trust it, because it will grow. Everyone is at work, everyone is producing more. There are strange innovations coming out every day, and we rely on those strange innovations. But if we're all the problem, I don't know, I think COVID's probably a good example, because they're raising all this inflation, but we're not really innovating. No one's at work, and we're just kind of sitting around, and the growth isn't inspiring much trust. And there's a lot of anxiety from that, because like my change jar is starting to look a little small.
I think the misinformation is what causes anxiety, and the inflation is what causes the insecurity. So if there were no inflation and people could rely on their savings and the price of their rent, they could plan for the future properly, right? They could say, I'm going to be $10 short for the next 5 years. Mom, can I borrow $10 a month for 5 years? You know what I mean? Like, they could plan for it. But when prices are increasing, you can't say like 3 years from now, I need you to lend me $40 a month, 2 years from now, $30 a month, 1 year from now, $15. Like, it's impossible for people to actually plan that way.
Well, and it sounds like a lot now. It's like, you want $40 a month then? But when it comes to then, $40 a month will be like, yeah.
Well, even in our lifetime, when I worked at McDonald's, a Big Mac meal was $5.25 after tax. It's now almost $10.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Jeez.
A Big Mac was $3.19 after tax. Like, you could buy it with your spare change. Now you have to break a bill to buy a burger, and I
remember being able to buy a hot dog for $1.25.
Yeah, those hot dog carts were great.
Yeah. But
I mean, there's really nothing wrong with prices going up if people are making more money, but it makes it so much harder for anybody to do their personal finances if the line is constantly shifting, right?
Right. So
for people, individuals, it's best to have prices either stay the same or go lower. People love lower prices. So when we build TVs right now, as a perfect example, the baby boom had a whole bunch of people in the workforce, and then all of us wanted TVs, and all of our kids got TVs, and now every house has like 4 TVs in it, right? So at this point, it would be really stupid if Canada made a bunch of TVs. It would be really stupid of us to expect growth in the TV market, because our population's not growing relatively, right? So why would you want to produce more TVs? Well, maybe if you're exporting them, yeah, but if nobody's buying them, why would you want growth?
Right, and all the third world countries who see television as something first world countries do are producing TVs, of satisfactory quality that, you know, first world countries can just buy them because Samsung will expand into those third world countries. So,
and look at all the leftover cell phones that get sent to Africa. All these people that could never afford $1,000 flagship phone. People are going through phones every 2-3 years now, and they're buying $1,200 phones every single time they do it.
right.
So
the benefit of it is now if Africans can afford better cell phones.
that's a case where refurbished items and things actually get recycled, and wealth does trickle down in some cases. And in abject poverty, yeah, wealth trickles down. But like your cell phone's not going to build you a well, and without internet towers and Wi-Fi and shit, like your phone can basically just do whatever is built into it. You can't add anything, you can't change it, you can't update it, you can't do anything with it. But you got a phone that you wouldn't have otherwise got. But that's not reason enough to justify like skewing the entire system and rocking the boat. You know what I mean?
Help a few like people in Nigeria get cell phones.
Yeah, and like the difference is 100. It's just like a 60 hertz refresh rate versus 144 hertz, or it's got 3 cameras on the back. Like nobody is a professional photographer that they need all these cameras, but we've got cameras in everything from our TVs to our microphones.
Well, to me, it's growth is not another growth is not another camera in my cell phone. Like I've got 3 here, and this is last year's cell phone, and they were like, "Oh, do you want the new one?" It's like, it's a cell phone. I don't care. I'm not going to notice the difference between this year's and last year's. And that is growth to some extent, but it's not a large amount of growth. It's literally like you have more ability to do with your cell phone, but it's not enough to actually affect my life. Actual growth, to me, it seems, would be adding something to my existing life that allows me to do something I couldn't do before in a quantifiable manner. So all of a sudden there's new dishwasher technology, and you just put your dishes in, or like you put your dishes into your cabinet and they're washed. You put them in dirty, no matter how dirty, and it stacks them and cleans them. So when you open up your cabinet, these dishes, that would probably save me, that would probably save me like a couple hours a week. And maybe it even composts them. And now I have more dirt in my lawn. So that saves me from having to fertilize my lawn in, that saves me another couple hours. Hours are money. Time is money. Yeah. And so when I have more, I can be more productive in other areas, and, I can maybe teach another student, and therefore another student has an hour more of learning. And so this ripples into the market. That's actual growth. Me having slightly more pixels in a photo on Facebook doesn't actually provide any growth into the market.
Right. Like how much innovation is happening in clothes dryers and washing machines. I mean, I was born in mid-'80s, and my mom had to wash my diapers, which were fabric. They didn't buy them from a store. And she washed them fabric with bobby pins or whatever, and washed them in the sink. Like cooking was hard. We didn't have microwaves in the early 90s. I mean, they existed, but not everybody had them yet, right?
My family had this huge one.
Yeah. But once the boomers started getting things like dishwashers and washing machines and dryers and like coffee makers, and well, I guess those were common back then. Sorry, bad example. But better fridges, like bigger fridges, better freezers, things like that added so much value when they were being produced at a scale that everybody could afford them. That was a huge value. For cars is the same thing, which you mentioned a few times, is the Ford effect. But like having really safe cars now, because the government forced and imposed regulations and restrictions and subsidized them when they were having bad years and forced them to restructure and everything. That type of benefit actually did help everybody because it causes less accidents, less emissions, safety and all that is aside. It's just, you're getting a better car too. You're getting like this on-screen dash display, no look thumb things on the wheel, so you don't have to be distracted while you're changing the radio. That kind of benefit is very useful, but it gets to a point where you don't need a Bentley. Like everybody just needs a car for transportation. Fundamentally, that's the biggest benefit, is being able to drive and pick something up instead of walking.
Yeah, you get diminishing returns off of innovation.
That's exactly right. Diminishing returns. So inflation doesn't factor in the diminishing returns. It just says forever, let's grow. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest problem with it, is that it's completely ignorant of the reality of the marketplace. Whether it's a shrinking demographic, an aging demographic, trends can change. anything like that. It's adversely affecting people's lives now when it used to be a benefit to it. The inflation and stimulation of growth used to help people provide them appliances that they couldn't otherwise afford, that saved them gobs of time, hours and hours of their day. But now the additional incremental benefit is so tiny that you can buy a Kia and be just as happy as if you bought a BMW. It doesn't even matter anymore.
Right.
And that's the problem with inflation, is the diminishing returns, as you said. You nailed it there. See, you understand it better than I do now.
Now, so if a country like, say, Japan, which I might be going off of hearsay here, has a negative interest rate because of their aging population, that's in order to provide more spending power in a market that is looking to have fewer and fewer people engaging in it.
Japan's pretty complicated because they import all of their energy. And it may sound trivial, but when all of your production relies on energy, like Japan's got a huge robotics manufacturing arm. So their economy, even though they have an aging population, is completely sustained by how much automation they've created in the process. And that's an example of when a government does a really good job at being an authoritarian. When they're planning for the future of their country based on their country's standings, that makes sense. But our country, in contrast, only looks forward 2 or 3 years, and all they do is pander to whatever trends are going on, and we have no long-term sustainable solutions.
The last debate showed us that nobody had any long-term solutions.
But it's changes every time the politicians change. So when Paul Martin was prime minister, we were still supporting nuclear power and stuff, I think. Maybe it was Chrétien, but depending on which administration is in office, we actually do sometimes have forward-thinking, forward-guiding principles. But because it keeps changing, there's nothing lasting. There's no tangible structure or foundation to rely on for economic viability in the long term. We're basically playing month to month with our entire country's assets. And we're acting like it's no big deal because growth is just good, period, for no reason other than the fact that bigger numbers are bigger. But bigger numbers when things cost more means smaller numbers sometimes.
Well, it's really hard to tell right now in Canada because our current prime minister does a lot of obfuscation, saying if we recover, we need to have a she-covery. So if we get more women into the marketplace, then we'll have a recovery. It's that's not logical. That's just that's just pandering. What are you actually doing? If more people borrowed more money, there'd be more spending. Yeah, but there'd be more debt. Well, no, now they are actually printing money. The States is doing that too, and so
the whole world is. The euro's terrible for it. That's all they did to bail out Greece and then Spain and Portugal. The Grexit, all of that was based on EU's fiscal monetary policy and the rules imposed upon their inflation targets and their trade agreements. And employment standards is another huge one, part of the EU. So to be part of the EU, you need to agree to a certain standard level of labor, right? And the reason why things are cheaper in other countries and why we import them is because people can abuse and exploit their labor in other countries, and we're not allowed to do it here. We pretend like that's not a thing, or that it only happens once in a while when we hear it on the news. But literally, that's why everything is cheaper that we import. It's either cheaper because it grows from the dirt and people just pick it up and give it to us, like oil and gold. But most things that we get that are value added, where they've taken linen and created a shirt out of it, where they've taken plastic and made shoes out of it, anytime something's created and we're getting cheap labor, it's because we're exploiting laborers somewhere else.
Yeah, I get this a lot when I go to the range, because you'll see a Beretta. Okay, I swear this is not just me shoehorning in firearm stuff, but it's just so blatant. You'll see a Beretta, which is about $800, $900 for the base model. And then you'll see this Turkish company, Gerson, which makes the same pistol. It's the exact same pistol. It doesn't have the word Beretta on it. And it'll be $400, $500 for the exact same pistol with the same tooling. And it's a good pistol. If you are looking at getting one, look into it because it's good. But this $500 difference is the change in labor from thing. And if you get a Chinese made firearm, it's going to be even cheaper.
You can get those for like $200 from the Philippines. They've got gunsmiths just sitting in shacks and shanties or whatever with their own little kilns and furnaces.
The Khyber Pass 1911s are just like, it's cool. I don't want to shoot it, but it's cool.
but they actually cast their own gun parts in just these tiny remote villages and in huts and shanties in the Philippines. And you can get a $200 gun.
Yeah,
it's worth $1,000 if you buy it from the factory that Beretta or
no, like
I don't know who makes Berettas, but
Italy. Italy makes
Beretta.
They're good. They're really good, and they make good shotguns. But it's the same thing with Benelli or Mossberg. You get the same thing from Turkey or China, and you're going to be paying a lot less, but you're going to be getting marginal quality. But it's still a shotgun, and this same goes with cars. And all these products, but it's so evident that we're in, like, if you want actual quality, you can get this from a nation that has labor laws, and that's literally it. That's what they tell you at the store. It's like, because this country has laxer labor laws. Slaves made this one.
Yeah, essentially.
This one. And that's,
or it's government subsidized in the case of China, where China actually pays for the shipping expenses of the companies.
Yeah,
as just an example. But
well, Turkey has higher building standards, at least. China's, you're playing with fire.
But China's dependent on the manufacturer, right? Any Chinese manufacturer can decide to make good quality products. We've seen it tons of times with, like, Huawei products have been sometimes really, really good and sometimes really, really bad.
Doesn't mean
just based on how much money they spend.
Yeah. No, Huawei, like, they couldn't compete in the North American market if they didn't make a phone that was comparable to an iPhone. Like, I've never heard someone be like, oh, Huawei's a piece of crap, but, like, I still wouldn't get one. All of China knows you're here.
But again, if inflation were an accurate reflection of prices of things that everybody uses, and everybody uses smartphones, right? Flagship phones wouldn't go up $300 every generation. They would go up $30 every generation.
Right. Like more like video games did, where they went from 40 to 60 to 80, and now they're stagnant at about 80 for a AAA game.
Yeah, and that's because people won't pay more. They've tried to sell some for 99 with, like, bonus content and DLC, and only the diehard fans would pay it, or 130 for, like, a remastered edition.
Yeah.
But people like me who just casually play games here and there, like I get one game a year kind of thing, I pay nothing more than $20 or $30. Just because it's not worth more than that to me.
Well, yeah, and you used to be able to get, in the 90s, you used to get a box up until about 2003 or something. You used to get this big box with a manual, and it was like a book in there.
Yeah, it was it was a whole engaging process to, like, learn how to play it and look at the pictures on the what do you call it? The image galleries and stuff of, like, as they were drawing the characters out, like, they'd show you behind the scenes kind of how they were making the game. But that value is all gone with downloaded content. And then the added problem, as we said in our EULA episode, is that they can restrict your access to play it because you're only buying a license to play games now. You're not buying ownership of the games, which was still the case before with cartridges. But because you had the physical cartridge, the license didn't matter because you could just play it.
Now, devil's advocate here, you can do a lot more in the games nowadays than you could before. So, you know, it's easier to code. I think I've even coded a Pac-Man game. I wouldn't even know where to start with something even like Quake 3 or like Grand Theft Auto or anything like that, because those games are so, there's a lot of complex stuff in there. It does actually take a lot more effort to create like a Call of Duty game than it does to create Final Fantasy VII.
Most of the effort in creating games like that is in the cinematics.
Yes.
All of that is just the Hollywood production they put into it. The actual like game physics, they borrow from an engine.
Yes.
The reflection maps in like puddles and water and glass, they borrow from an engine. The object models, they just buy them from asset catalogs and plop them in the world. They create the map just with procedural generation oftentimes to get that uneven surface, so it's not just a flat land. And they model cities, so they'll just travel and take pictures of another city that they wanna look like, and they'll come. The most expensive part is all the cinematics, all the voice acting, all of the script writing. That to me isn't adding value to my game. I get, well, some people probably appreciate it, but like I'm playing to play a game. I don't buy a game to watch a movie. Like if I want to watch a movie, I watch a movie.
Yeah. So, but you make a good point. there's
They're costing themselves
we
that money
are-
for no reason. They don't
like
have
the exercise we're doing is we're dissecting the value of a product that everyone would buy that would be in the PCC, the CPI. Looking at my notes here, making sure I'm actually talking.
The purchasing price index is related to production, and the CPI is the consumer price index related to you and I.
So they do have a lot, like the teams making up video games are larger, and the games sometimes are good, but you do get those indie games which end up costing less because, well, production generally is less. Although look at something like Stardew Valley, which has sold so much and everyone's got a copy, and it's literally one guy made this entire game, and it's pretty epic if you like farming simulators. It's
I
adorable.
think Meat Boy was like that too, like a single individual guy
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah. Super.
The other thing you have to keep in mind is the context is the scale.
Mhm.
Like gaming before was nowhere near as huge a market as it is today.
Oh no, that's a good point. So you're saying essentially that demand went up. And so because demand went up, prices
Didn't have to rise.
didn't have to rise, but it also, because demand went up, everyone went, there's money in video games, and so you get more competition, which actually should lower price. Wait a second.
But
What's
again, they
going on here?
collude. That's the thing. When you're trying to fix inflation, you're literally colluding. You're price fixing. The thing that we say is not free markets is what we're doing when we force prices up.
That's
So-
not capitalism.
Prices went up just because a game had this spectacular production value like Spider-Man or something, people would still pay it. Right? And it was a great game and it was worth $80 and everybody would just pay it. But the difference is like things like EA, where they're trying to scalp all of their customers out of even more money by charging them for like loot boxes and like
Yeah.
gamble cards and stuff like that, because a lot of people trade with their friends, like sort of like Pokemon cards, but it's soccer players in FIFA, for
Or like
example.
Fortnite mechanics where you buy skins and everyone
Yeah.
can play for free, but you buy everything in the game.
Yeah. So that money alone is more than the production cost of the entire game. So in theory, they could have given the game away completely free to absolutely everybody and still made money on it. So by that logic, that's an inflation cost that's not being factored in because, skins on Fortnite isn't costed into the CPI. The government doesn't care if you spend money on downloaded content.
Right.
They're talking about basket of goods, like I said, like chairs and phones and things that everybody buys, not necessarily need, but things that everybody perceives to need. So it's because of this psychology and the appearance of returns that inflation is favorable to governments and businesses, because looking bigger and looking growing makes people more likely to invest in your company. And when somebody invests in your company, it means that they're buying shares. And when they buy shares, that's money you get to use to make your company bigger or pay yourself a bonus or whatever. But the price of your shares go up. So all the shares you already own become an increase in wealth in your back pocket. And you can then turn that money again, buy more shares and drive your own price up even higher. So the rest of your shares become more valuable. And that's that problem with inflation, is the compounding nature of interest. When you do something every year on a percentage basis, your compounding rates are exaggerated year over year as time progresses. And that's what causes super cycles, what they call, like every 10 years, well, they say 8 to 13 years, but I just call it 10. Every 10 years is a market correction of like 30% at least. And then every time we have one of those, the prices are supposed to correct back to a normal level. But even in 2008, when everything crashed, they never hit a normal level. The government dumped money into the system to keep it floating.
Well, prices kept going up. Gas never returned to the level it was before, and
which is funny because we saw negative oil futures in March.
I remember I was working, I got laid off, and then my rent went up about 30%. And then, I got my job back, so I was able to pay it. But now I was scraping by a couple bucks of savings every month that I was using to buy, I was putting it into gasoline or potato chips, because it's like, why save $6? Why save you know, $40 a year? That's not gonna, like, I save more now doing tutoring every year than I did then. So why even save money if I'm not making any? Why save pennies
And that's
when later I'm
reflected
going to
in,
make hundreds?
that's also shown in the country's saving rates. Like deposit rates are almost zero. I don't want to say zero because it's probably not entirely true.
Yeah.
But like the psychology and appearance of returns is the problem with inflation, because it's fake. It's intentionally deceiving. It's showing people that your company's growing when it may not need to. It might need to grow. That might be beneficial. If you're a courier and you've got a bike and you can finally afford to finance a car, you can do way more far deliveries than you could on a bike, and you can make tons more money, meaning you're tons more productive than if you just had a bike.
Right. And you have more expenses, but that's like, you're making more money to offset the expenses. So in the end, you are making, it's like a farmer who buys that, like, oh, he spends $1 million on a tractor. Well, that tractor is going to save him, over $1 million a year.
Yeah, it makes the money. But it comes to a point, though, where like buying a Mercedes-Benz doesn't make sense to be a courier. Like you don't need a Mercedes-Benz to move from point A to point B. And inflation is encouraging us to get Mercedes-Benzes for our courier businesses.
Well, we talked
businesses
about this.
that don't need to grow, or the ones that are growing already because they're productive. There's no reason a company can't just wait a year and save up money and then grow. Like there's no need to do it on interest. It costs more. Even if you get your stuff sooner, the risk of loss is greater if you do it, if you spend on credit versus earning money, saving it, and then spending what you've saved.
Right, which is, like, honestly, on a personal note, that's what maybe I read too much Heinlein as a kid, where he says, like, don't use a credit card. I still don't have a credit card. If I want something, I'll save up for 3 months and I'll buy it.
But here's the thing. If you would have got a credit card and stuck it in the S&P at 18, you would have like $180,000 right now. Just from your first credit card, and it would have been all debt, just $2,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
Because it compounds. And since then, we've dumped money in the market. Like during COVID, look at stock markets, record highs, more record high closes than we've ever had in recorded history in the stock market indexes during a time of lockdown.
Yeah.
This is exactly what I was saying when they were giving people rent subsidies. All they're doing is paying landlords and helping people who already have too much money maintain their wealth. And they're borrowing from the public, who are the taxpayers, who are laborers who can't afford to be in the investment markets because they're priced out from fees, or just trying to diversify a portfolio. If a stock costs $300, that's your entire savings. How can you buy one piece of every stock if you can't afford one stock? Like you're priced out of the market by being poor. And the people who had property got the government to help their tenants pay rent to them, which they then wrote off as like expenses and stuff, fixing up, and depreciation on other assets they hold. Property doesn't count as depreciation, but like if they had equipment, like coin operated laundries inside their buildings, they could just buy new coin op machines and put the old ones in another rental property they own that didn't have coin ops. You know what I mean? Like they can write things off and move things around, whereas people just have what they have and that's it.
Yeah.
They have no mobility or flexibility with their assets.
Which is a lot of the reason why I joined Occupy at that time, because I was seeing no way out. I was living on my paycheck and there was no room for anything but work in my life. And I was just like, ugh. Which is why I doubled down and spent everything on school.
And that's an excellent investment, because that pays itself for the rest of your life. Even if it doesn't make you money, you're smarter for the rest of your life and you only live once.
Well, and I'll make better decisions, which will end up saving me money in the long. Like I'll know how to read a label better. I'll know how to discern and make decisions better. So I'll end up saving money, not buying myself stupid stuff, or I'll avoid danger because I'll be better able to think things through. I'll be able to understand the doctor better. So I went to a doctor recently and I was smart enough to know that guy was a quack. So I got out of there and got a second opinion because, well, I'm smart enough. I learned how to learn, and therefore I saved myself getting cancer treatment when I don't have cancer. I'm not even exaggerating on that.
But critically, though, too, you didn't get a student loan to go through school. And what actually hurts people is the student loan. because then you're offsetting the benefits of education with the negative side effect of a lifetime debt that you can't even bankrupt yourself out of, and an interest that you have to pay a bank who didn't do anything.
Yeah.
They literally didn't do anything. The bank didn't make the money they gave you. They just created it out of thin air from somebody else's deposits. They didn't earn the interest and help you study. They just sat there and said, you owe us no matter what happens for the rest of your life. Even if you get sick and you are under cancer treatment, you still owe that student loan till the day you stop breathing. And I mean, there in Canada, you can get forgiveness and stuff. But I mean, like the predatory student loans, like in the States, or what's showing up all across Europe now, where like Oxford and Cambridge and stuff and Harvard, they're like, oh, maybe our tuitions are a bit high. When they're generating or raking in more money than most hospitals get just from donors and alma maters and stuff. Anyway, that's way off topic.
Well, because student loans are causing an inflation they are causing inflation in tuition prices.
Absolutely.
You have this money coming in, therefore,
and there's no limit to it. Everybody gets approved.
Right. So they're like the people setting the prices say, well, they can afford it, then it must be worth more. Therefore, it is worth more. Therefore, a 55% increase in tuition.
Yeah, and students are 18. They've never had debt before, and they just say, "Whatever, I'm going to school. I'm
going to live
back
forever.
later."
It doesn't matter. It's just like, well, forever becomes a long time. The 18 to 36, that's another 18 years of your life.
Yeah,
and you pay it off when you're 40, and you like that's money
no
that
idea
you're
if
not
you
giving to your
finish.
kids.
Like you might go blind and not be able to read, so you can't finish studying or write your test. Like anything could happen to you in the 10 years that you spend, give or take, going to school. But you're taking out a loan before you've ever even known what debt is. And it's the only loan of your lifetime that you can't get out of. It's the most severe and critical loan that you can get. And they're preying on children and then overpricing school and tuition fees because they're guaranteed to have, I don't want to say idiots like a pejorative thing, but like they have uneducated, untrained. That's why they're going to school, is to learn how to do stuff like manage money. So to give those people the predatory loans is just doubly worse. It's like just like EA selling loot boxes to kids. It's gambling for kids.
Right.
You're preying on people's vulnerabilities for profit at their expense, their lifetime expense, not just their cash expense from discretionary income. But it is a big deal.
Well, and there's a whole scam to get people in there, like get as many people in. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. We talked about that a lot.
So from that, maybe I'll take it a bit into the bonds and stuff, so we get an idea of what's actually happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
So because of, like we were talking about, the psychology and appearances of companies' balance sheets looking better when the numbers are growing, this leads to runaway financing situations where debt is issued to an investor, and that investor spends the money on construction, and the construction workers and suppliers get paid and deposit into their banks, and the banks in turn issue mortgages to buy condos and in a building that's still being built by the original developer, like for an example. So in other words, debt comes from nowhere or from an investor or from a bank or whatever, goes to the developer. The developer starts building things. Before they're done, they start selling their properties. The people buying those properties, those condos, are getting mortgages from the bank. So that money from the mortgage is a loan based on a piece of real estate that doesn't exist yet. And that's going into the developer's pocket. The developer's business, like those pre-sales, they help fund construction of other projects. So it's their business to not let money sit still, just like the bank's business is to charge interest and fees, because that's the only thing they can do to generate revenue. So a good bank means a bank that charges more. That's just what the markets dictate. So if you want to buy stock in a bank, you're buying stock in a bank that charges its customers more, generally. Some banks offer better services to their customers, so customers like them, but their stocks aren't as valuable because the investor's risk is that you might do something that benefits the customer at the expense of the shareholder. So the value of the stock is dependent also on the culture and the direction that the bank itself is taking. But having money sitting stagnant is essentially a loss, though, to a business that's a developer, because their only business is to create and generate revenue on construction. And the only way they can do that is through financing. And the only way they can do that is through pre-sales of other people financing. So all of this is just debt that causes more debt that gets paid to the debtor to repay a debt so that he can take out a bigger debt on 2 more projects instead of 1.
None
right?
of it's ever getting repaid because
none of it ever gets repaid. That's what inflation encourages.
If we go back to my trying to understand this, so you're taking it out on future growth, expecting that future growth is going to pay for the leveraging of the money, which
that is the leveraging,
which you issue out as bonds, but instead of paying it back, you make a bond with a bond, which is the debt which you've created, is being leveraged in itself.
It is, yeah. I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Again, you definitely do understand. It's just, it is complicated.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with...
I think I have the ability to understand more than the actual
No, you do, because you're getting ahead of me. That means that you understand exactly where you're at. And you're like, hey, this doesn't really work. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So the issue then becomes... not while they're growing, because as long as they're building more properties, they're productive and they're adding value to the economy and it's stimulative and the country looks like it's progressing. Mm-hmm. China has like these massive cities that are completely empty and half-finished developments. That's the problem. When you have 1 and it becomes 2 and then it becomes 4 and then it becomes 8 properties, it's not a big deal. But after like 10 years, when you've got 150 properties, and suddenly you realize that, like, say 20 of them can't get sold because, one of them found a sinkhole and they didn't do their geotechnical analysis properly and the ground foundation needs to be redone.
Or so they need a bunch more mosquitoes swarming the entire building.
Yeah.
That's real.
That was when they tried to put plants on all the...
Yeah, they tried to be green. Every time China tries to be green, they screw up and make it worse. But
so the issue is once they start accumulating these unsold properties, they have to sort of account for them in some way. And what they do is they bundle them up in accounting jargon, I don't even know, but they bundle them up as assets instead of saying they're unsold inventory. Like if you and I were selling pencils and we had pencils we couldn't sell, we'd label them pencils, unsold pencils.
Yes.
But with real estate, they say, oh, it's such a secured investment. You can call it whatever the hell you want. And people just believe you.
So you have like 3 buildings that are empty, save for the guy taking care of it probably, or making sure it's still standing, the caretaker. And they call, and so instead of saying, okay, we need to sell these are assets for sale sitting on a shelf, just like a video game sitting on the shelf at EB waiting to be sold. It's no, look at this asset we have. Okay, so they're just reclassifying it. Now, one thing you did bring up earlier, which kind of is creating this doom scenario in my head, is the fact of the numbers that you quoted earlier about how hard it is to get a place, how much you have to save up to get a place to buy, a place to live in China. Yeah. You said like 24 years?
25 years, yeah.
25 years, Shenzhen, which is a generation. It takes over.
But that's assuming you had 0 tax and all you did was work for 25 years.
Right. Now, so if you're a new homeowner, you're going to... So you have to wait.
But assuming you have cost of living, it's 100 years plus.
So you have to start saving up. Okay. So if you add these 2 together, it creates this nightmare scenario in my head. So you have to save up so that your kids might have a place to live when they start having kids.
Yeah, and only if you invested in the stock market for your whole life will your kids be able to have a place to live.
So what's ending up happening is nobody's buying houses because everyone's saving up. Not because they're not spending their money because they're saving, but because they can't actually use any of that saving because it's nowhere near enough to buy the place. And so, but at the same time, they have, what you're saying is they have entire cities upon cities of unsold, real estate. Something's wrong here.
It's worse than that, though.
Yeah.
It's actually worse, because what you're suggesting is that these things are just sitting there not doing anything. But in reality, these people did pay already. They paid for an unfinished building. Wow. So they got that 25-year salary out of all of these millions of people and spent the money.
Oh shit. And then they built buildings that the people won't be able to afford.
And to diversify their portfolio of real estate, they buy buildings in Canada and drive up
Do the
Vancouver's
same thing to us.
Yeah, Vancouver's prices. They drive up LA's prices. They drive up San Francisco's prices. They drive up New York prices. And it's not just Chinese people.
Is that what you see when you see those Chinese like real estate things where they don't even advertise in English and they like build a building in someplace and it's like, come to me, but they look like they're like 21.
And they don't even want to live in them, right? Like they're stockpiling them because they have so many in China. And you got to remember, like China's got 1 billion plus people, right? Canada's got like 36 million. So like this tiny, tiny drop in the bucket of rich people coming in from China takes over an entire city. That's more money than like entire cities in Canada have because of the scale differential. So when you've got developers who are building, let's say 150 projects in China alone, and say 25 of them of like big towers, 500 units per tower, they're sitting empty or unfinished or not even built. Or China just, the Chinese government just had a bunch of them condemned and they had to blow up like 6 full high rises that were fully built, but they were unlivable for some reason.
Yeah, I keep seeing stories about their infrastructure being put up. Just you see like cracks in the foundation and stuff like that on something that.
No, you see people just living on concrete slabs because they own the place and they're paying mortgages that they can't afford. Like they can't afford to also rent a place that's livable. They literally have to live in these shacks, and they're just high-rise shacks. But the problem is the government of China and the economy of China and the way that we enable our accounting practices, even in the West, the generally accepted accounting principles that allow developers to claim that real estate is a secure asset. Those companies don't just affect Chinese people. They are so big and they're managing so much money. They're literally changing the price of real estate in London and Spain, England and Spain and Canada and the US and everywhere, right? Just because of the scale of the Chinese market. So now, when we're investing in emerging markets and we say China's this workhorse, look at their growth rates, 10% a year, 16% a year, 20% per year. China's just growing and everything's great, They're counting their real estate. We're not.
Oh, geez, no wonder.
So you've got a bulk of people overpaying for unfinished homes.
I've been actively not trying to make real estate examples here because you said at the beginning, we don't count real estate in the price indexes, but they are. And therefore, when they just keep building these things.
And we do count them in the GDP sense, but we don't count them in inflation. So when it comes to people's purchasing power and how it affects everybody's individual lives, they want to minimize that as much as possible and drive the price higher. Because that helps business, and business stimulation pays for campaigns. Campaigns get people elected. Elected people want power. That's exactly how our system is designed to work. It's working. We just have a bad system. So the issue is not only did people overpay for their place, then they prepaid for their places. Their places were never built, right? They're exploited labor, so they're already being underpaid for the labor they are producing in their lifetimes. And on top of that, it's corrupting the marketplaces of every other major city in the world because they need to diversify in case their system collapses because they know it's a bubble. They're fully aware that they're spending money they don't have. And those banks are also trading themselves between other banks. So you've got companies that are set up as real estate income trusts where all they do is own property, rent property, and manage property. And all they do is collect money and pay dividends to shareholders who help them buy more property, own more property, and invest and rent more property, right? Perfectly legitimate business model. But the problem is the money generated from these REITs is lesser tax, first of all. It only helps people who can afford to buy into them. And they're buying properties in markets that they are intentionally inflating market prices by flooding the market with sales. And they're selling, or they're buying all these condos and they're sitting empty. They're buying them just to drive up the price,
right?
So that they can buy more condos and drive up the price. Until the price in Vancouver equals that in China, in Shenzhen or Shanghai or Beijing, they're going to keep doing it because that's a profitable business model.
Right, but you in a logical world, you drive up the price in order to sell for a higher price. So you buy a condo and then you sell the condo. You buy it for, I don't know, a couple $1 million, and then you sell all the things, and they end up giving you drive up the price because you're going to make a higher profit on it. But the thing is, in that equation, is that you're selling it, and you end up selling it for the thing. So the money is still coming back, and the people are still getting a thing, but
they're not selling it.
They're not selling it. People aren't getting these
because
things.
You don't need to, because it's a secure asset. Real estate can be leveraged. You can say, hey, bank, loan me $25 million because I've got 25 condos of $1 million each. The bank's like, fine, I'm going to get my money back one way or the other. No problem. Here's 25 million. They take that 25 million, put down payments on 25 more condos. The price of condos goes up for all 50 of your new condos, and you can rent them out. So they generate income in addition to raising their own property values, because the scale of the Chinese market is so much bigger than the scale of everybody else's. The money they're dealing with is multiples higher than the money that we're dealing with in North America or Europe. Like an order of magnitude is a huge difference. It's the difference from a grain of rice to the size of a house. So I guess moving on from that, I want to get into bonds a bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sorry. We keep trying to get
No, it's good. It's good. It's helpful.
All right.
Yeah, so as we discussed before, like if you wanted to issue a bond to me, you could say, here's a bond. I'll pay you, give me $100. I'll give you $10 every month for 10 months plus an extra month. So I make $10 on the loan.
And then I make an extra $10. Well, no, then
you get $100 now, but you pay $110 later, which to you is fine because, prices are going to rise by next year. You'll have an extra $10 to pay me back.
The expectation with growth in the market. So I'm getting exactly what I got back because I'm expecting the market to do good.
Now, if you own a bunch of properties and you want to give me a bond, right? You want to borrow money from me. You can say, look at all these properties I have as collateral, lend me money. And I will be more inclined to lend you money than a hobo who owns absolutely nothing, obviously, right?
Well, the hobo, like, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to drink more. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to give you money because just like spending money on a tank that's going to explode, a beer bottle isn't going to appreciate in value.
But even if they put it to perfect use, they could only make, what, $100 with it? Like, not millions.
Right.
They could make enough that they could lose in their wallet.
Yeah.
Like, you can't make that much money out of $100. You can maybe make $500 out of it, but to a real estate investor, it's nothing. That's not even rent, $500.
But if I have 200 billion worth of assets, then I can do a lot if I leverage that through a bond.
Especially if you leverage it, but especially because you're going to get a cheaper interest rate because you're low risk, because you own so much property. So not only will I give you more money, I'm going to give you a better interest rate. And the product that you're buying with that rental money can then be borrowed off of again. So the system is designed to encourage and incentivize people in the least need to acquire the most at the cheapest possible price. And then it feeds itself.
I still can't get over the fact that nothing ends up getting sold. The thing is
building.
Because if like capitalism in my head is I start a business and I start selling stuff, I can leverage that in order to buy another factory so I can sell more stuff, but they're just moving, like they're literally negating value in the system, or they're aggregating value towards them in the system. And it's short-sighted, but it's making the money.
Yeah,
but
it's very short-sighted.
It's only benefiting them. The whole idea of me making a factory is that you get this good, you get slippers or something, and now I can supply slippers at a higher quality to everyone and at a lower price because I can produce them better because I was smart enough to do my business in a certain way. And now everyone has great slippers and says, oh man, these slippers are great. But what happens if I say I have the potential to make, 1 billion pairs of slippers? And look at these my assets. I could sell these whenever I want. And everyone would have slippers when I sell them. So give me money so that I can sell all these slippers. And then, they give me money, and then I take that money and say, look how much money I've got from making slippers. You should give me more money for making slippers.
That's why Rolex destroys their own products. That's exactly why they artificially create, what do you call that? Scarcity. Scarcity is the key in all of economics fundamentally presumes a scarcity of resources.
Right. It's like butter or maple syrup or diamonds.
Yeah. And it also assumes people are rational.
Mhm.
But when you have company stocks that are growing 10, 15% a year because they're buying and leveraging real estate developments and things like that are really shaky and unstable to begin with, fundamentally, their stocks look really attractive to investors, so their stock values go up as well. So even just the numbers on paper become inflated because the loans become inflated, because the real estate becomes inflated, because the company was, buying one, then getting two, buying two, then getting four. That whole compounding process, it works great only when things are perfect, but it's not sustainable because nothing is always perfect. Eventually, there has to be a downturn, and you're never prepared for it if you're constantly assuming next year is going to be bigger or better. The most responsible thing you could possibly do in governing a country is not look for growth, but look for need. If you assess demand based on need, and you made needs affordable to all people, not just the average income, but the lowest possible income, and everybody could save money and start a business eventually just from the bottom line up, everybody would be on the same playing field. But when you're priced out of the market from a small business, the only thing you can do is offer a service. The only thing you can do is be a plumber, be a carpenter, or be the one person that's like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, and everybody else loses. And that type of system doesn't actually benefit the people. And if you think about what the point and purpose of a market and money is, it's to facilitate trade. It's so that I don't have to take a cow all the way down the street to exchange for 1,000 pens and then sell 900 of them so that I can keep 100 pens.
Right.
Like, that's just so absurd, right?
Well, if I'm making slippers, but I need leather, and so if you're selling cows, I don't have to go directly to you. I can go to someone who you distribute leather to, and you have a bunch of middlemen who you distribute various parts of the cows to, because if you're in capitalism, you don't waste any part of the cow that you can make money off of.
Exactly.
And it's like you use the entire buffalo, and I buy it from that middleman, the distributor who's selling leather goods, and he aggregates it, and so it comes out, and now it's cheaper for everybody because now we have this middleman. And now I can make my slippers cheaper because we have the market, and I don't have to build right beside your cow factory. I can put my factory where it would be most efficient for distribution.
And the key point to take note, though, is the market is for the people. The benefit of the marketplace is so that every person in the country has easier access to goods.
Well, I'm just selling. Sorry, I can't get over this point.
No, the value of money is also something that the public allows the government to handle. It's not the government's to handle. It's our productivity and labor and our currency. We're allowing the government to use it, and they're abusing that authority. If we wanted our money to retain value, we would never agree with inflation. None of us. Because most people aren't self-employed. Most people don't benefit from inflation. Only self-employed people benefit from inflation. Only shareholders benefit from inflation. The actual workers never do. They're always paid after the fact, after the money's already been in circulation and spent. And if you add money supply to the market, you decrease the value of the currency for everybody, but only after it's spent. So the first person to spend it gets to spend it at the proper purchasing power, and everybody else gets to pay the diluted expense. So that's the tax that inflation, when you hear inflation is a tax on everybody, that's the tax that they're talking about. They're saying the first people who have access to new money, either the banks on their interest, because that money came out of nowhere, interest money wasn't anywhere. Loan money wasn't anywhere, because of fractional reserve lending, they can lend out 10 times more than they have in deposits, and that deposit wasn't their own money, it was somebody else's. So money that's created out of absolutely nowhere isn't benefiting the public if they don't get to spend it first. What it's doing is diluting the public purchasing power and making them poorer, even if they're making more money, even if they're earning slightly more than the year before. If the price is increased and they can afford to buy less goods and their discretionary income is lower, they haven't benefited at all, but the numbers have gone up. Their salary looks bigger, their paycheck looks bigger, right? And it's that type of mentality that they're intentionally doing, because if they just outright tried to rob people of their assets, people would freak out. But if they do it subtly in a really complicated way like inflation does, then everybody's just passive as sheep to the slaughter. So that same compounding that makes a developer rich in the beginning works against them to lose all their value exponentially more quickly. When share values drop, as investors sell the developer's stock when they realize that there's some funny business going on, or there's unsold inventories that they're classifying as income assets, which don't generate income, like a hotel that's sitting empty. Oh, we own a hotel, that's an asset. Well, if nobody's coming to your hotel, it's not an asset. If you're trying to sell it and you can't sell it, it's not an asset.
Well, this is why, like, I keep coming back to that point. It's like you actually have to provide the service. You actually have to provide the good.
And people need to want it. They have to go to your hotel. You can't just make goods and say that they're good.
I have a BMW. It's broken. Well, I still have a BMW. So you should treat me like someone who can afford a BMW. Like, come on.
Yeah.
This is what I'm getting out of it.
The weird thing about real estate is that the way they can leverage it, and I guess I wanted to talk a bit about like the financial institutions too, but I guess how much time do we have? 20 minutes or so?
Don't know when we started.
Neither do I. I wasn't paying attention. Sorry.
No.
Oops. Maybe I'll just say something quickly then. When I'm talking about the numbers being bigger, those are the financial statements that corporations, especially public ones, are required to produce, and that's why we have generally accepted accounting principles across the world so that we can actually compare apples to apples, more or less between countries, even though there are slight differences. But the financial statements which investors use to determine the future prospects of a company, like their growth, it's founded on materially misleading statements produced by the developer. And this is supposed to be combated by hiring auditors, like financial auditors and accountants, to overlook the books and see that they're not manipulating the words or in phrases and things like that. But another layer of corruption is in the accounting practices, because like PricewaterhouseCoopers, for instance, who looked after Evergrande's audit earlier this year is when the stock tanked like 97% or whatever it shot down after they realized they were insolvent. The entire time leading up to that, PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is a well-reputed accounting firm, they got paid like $40 million for the audits that they did of Evergrande's books. And that $40 million is chump change to Evergrande, who's charges that just for one building out of their 180 buildings that are sitting empty, right? But that's some Chinese person's whole life's income that PricewaterhouseCoopers took to do a bad job at the one thing they're supposed to do well. Yeah. And there's no recourse, there's no repercussion. I mean, there's an investigation, they say, but like, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars compared to tens of billions of dollars, right? So the money in the system is big enough to sway the entire conversation. Like Evergrande had enough money to basically to dupe even listed market companies like the New York Stock Exchange and Dow companies and all these mutual fund holders. They own bits and pieces, and a lot of this Evergrande debt is denominated in US dollars. Like a huge amount of it is. I think I have the actual numbers actually. Yeah, so Ashmore Group is like $400 million. That's just what's due this month, or last month, I guess. BlackRock had over 350 million. UBS Group had over 250 million, and HSBC had about 200 million. That's just the month though, and every month you've got bonds maturing that they have to pay their debt, and they can't even afford the interest on it because they owe hundreds of billions. And the reason they owe all that money is because they took it from mortgages issued by banks to Chinese people, plus the down payments of these Chinese people. And they're still paying their mortgages, even though their buildings are completely underwater. You know?
Right. So Evergrande's owing all this money to these investment firms who they issued their bonds to. And they're essentially, they're just paying the interest, but they can't even do that because
well, the shares tanked. Once they found out they couldn't pay, the share values tank, and then you lose all that money you used to claim that you had because you had a high share price. All of a sudden you have zero cash.
Right, because reality being the thing that will hit you in the face no matter what.
So what they have to do now is sell off assets, right? So they try and sell building. Well, what do you do when you dump a whole bunch of supply into a market? You drive the price down. So now all of their assets, even their good ones, are worth less money because they're trying to sell them all at once,
Right,
because
even
they're
though-
forced to make bond payments.
Yeah, their stock value already tanked, so they put a bunch of stuff onto the market, which they were holding off of the market, and nobody has money to buy it, so no one's going to buy it. But
And stuff they don't want to sell, they have to sell it for pennies on the dollar. Like
Right,
they're actually
so they're
their actual
making-
valuable stuff, they're forced to sell it just to make a 1 month payment when they're going to go bankrupt the next month anyway.
and that makes their value go down anyways from having to sell it, so they're tanking. Now, this would get worse. Now, in America or Canada, a company like this would tank, and everyone would be like, losers. But this corporation is owned by the government. Am I right?
No.
No. Well, they're Chinese. Well,
Yeah, so the government's allowed to do whatever they want with any Chinese company. That's just
Yeah.
the way China's set up.
yeah.
The exposure in the financial markets isn't restricted to China.
Mhm.
These companies own properties in Canada that will bankrupt Canadians who have mortgages. It's the exact same problem as in China. It's just going to be a delayed effect because the way bonds work is if you can't pay it, you get a 30-day grace period, right? Just like a credit card. They give you like 20 days to pay without ever paying any interest on it.
I'm getting worried over here.
That's a good way to get a credit rating and stuff. If you're going to get a house one day, wink, wink, is get a credit card and just pay it off every month, but use it once a month so that you get a credit rating increase. Because no credit is worse than some credit.
I know. My
But
wife's
anyway,
got plenty of credit.
With Evergrande, right, you've got Canadian pensions that have diversified funds. And in that diversified fund, you've got emerging markets. And what's an emerging market? It's one of those big places like Brazil or China or India that are growing really fast and are really cheap to buy. Well, they were growing at 20% per year because of their real estate development and their exploitation of labor, right? So we are personally, individually, in our retirement savings plans and in our country's sovereign wealth fund, benefiting off of the slave labor of other countries, first of all. And we're exposed to their mismanagement of real estate resources and asset allocation. And they own physical property in our country. So when Evergrande goes down and they can't pay, they also have property here that's going to be fire sale. So this property in our country then becomes a downward pressure on all the prices of our own real estate market. The same pressures that pushed it up will push it down faster. It's much faster to drop, even though there's a limit bottom of zero, whereas up limit, there's no limit, right? You can always just invent more zeros. But the issue is how fast it corrects. And when it spikes down that fast, if people don't have the savings because they believe, oh, I saved up all these years to finally buy a $250,000 condo in Vancouver. Now it's worth 350 grand. Like it was all worthwhile. If your condo drops to 100 grand and you can't afford it, you can't just like get rid of it and move out. That mortgage follows you. That's what an underwater mortgage is.
Okay.
It means
So
that when you sell it, you still owe more than what you got.
Okay, I see. So
then Canadians have a debt for the rest of their life that they can't buy another property with, and they can't afford rent somewhere else, and they have to move.
Sorry, let me just get this through. Let me just make so I buy something for $1 million because it's like, a house, 2-bedroom house, $1 million in a bad neighborhood. It's like, oh, geez, it's brilliant. It's so cheap. But then, the Chinese do what they do best.
But you need to have a mortgage on it first.
I have a mortgage on it because I didn't pay it off. I haven't bought it.
Yeah.
And so now I owe $1 million to the bank. And then the market crashes and the bank says now it's worth 10% of what it was. And I could have afforded it, but now I have to pay $1 million because of a previous agreement.
Yeah, you still owe the money. So it's easier to think of if you have a down payment, right? Because then it's your life savings.
Yeah.
So even if you break even, you've lost your life savings.
Right.
So if you have $1 million property and you paid for half of it with your life savings, 500 grand, right? And the property drops down to $490,000, you still owe 500,000 and they have all of your money.
Jerks.
Yeah. So you've lost your life savings, plus you have to pay a monthly debt for a place you can't afford to live in.
Yeah, that I'm probably going to end up selling in order to pay for that place that I don't live in.
See, on the flip side, it finally allows people who otherwise couldn't get into the market to buy places for cheap, but it's at the expense of people's life savings. That means they're going to be more dependent on the government, more needing of social services. They'll live less healthy lifestyles, so there'll be more impediment on the or a burden on the healthcare system. So like all these costs start compounding as the exponential cost of loss compounds. You know what I mean? And it's that compounding problem that makes things unsustainable, because it'll only ever work if the world was perfect forever. That can't happen. It's just physically impossible for the world to be that stable. So to encourage this type of accounting and leveraging and fractional reserve lending is to say that tomorrow has to be better no matter what. And it's the most reckless you could possibly be with money that people will allow, because if you did it explicitly and overtly, everybody would be against it. You have to make it convoluted and complicated and complex, and they have to rule people out of the market so they can't participate, so that they don't even know what's happening behind the scenes.
Right.
Because nobody follows the news like that.
Right. And when you do follow the news, the thing is, like, you follow
like Bloomberg,
Yeah, like you watch CNN or Fox and you're going to get this, you're going to end up being mad at stuff that's
and you won't be informed.
It'll be like inflation is happening, everything's going to be fine, and you'll be like, yay, and they'll be like, then they'll say another word and expect you to cheer, and this is not news. They're not actually reporting on anything. CNN doesn't actually have reporters. They haven't reported on anything since 2014 or something stupid like that. And like Fox will have reporters, but they're still Fox.
NBC's got like Jim Cramer, right? Like their stock guy, and all he does is yell and make sound effects and push big red buttons and stuff. People love this. They think that they're some kind of market genius or something because they look like they're strung out on coke or meth or something. Like that's not how investors are. If you look at Warren Buffett talk, he's just like calm, collected, calculating, serious, and you know what I mean? Like he's
get my point across instead of being like, invest. Bing, 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 bing. Yeah.
But the funny thing is, most of the really successful traders are like autistic or have like mental dysfunctions or like dyslexia or something like that, or OCD is in my case.
Well, you need a certain type of brain to deal with that. I can wrap my head around some of this stuff, but
it takes an obsession to really understand it.
Well, it's the same in minor digression. Like they tell you when you get into history, if you don't have that kind of obsessional bug, don't get into it, because you'll just be wasting your energy. And you need to find yourself like, I could have sex, or I could read this history of the Ottoman Empire. Well, obviously, I'm going to read the history of the Ottoman Empire. It's just like that guy is going to be a historian. It's the same thing. You have to, a certain type of people will gravitate towards that. And the people that do that, now you could get a type of person that ends up understanding the market, but not understanding human reality. You actually need to sell your goods. Sorry, I can't get over that.
It's the interaction between dynamics that makes it complicated. So it's not to say that people who aren't autistic can never understand. It's just that they'll be bored to tears, and then they'll realize, oh, in the end, now I understand everything and there's nothing I can do. Whereas somebody who's like mentally obsessed with this stuff, they don't have to actually participate to have that want or inkling or motivation to keep studying it. You know what I mean? So like following it and watching patterns form on a chart, to me, is like watching a seed grow, like watching life sprout from chemistry. It's all just dynamic systems bumping into each other and setting numbers.
Well, then you get the Wolf of Wall Street types that get in there for I want big money and I want big stuff and I want coke and hookers. It's like, well, we all want that really at heart, but you know, but they
teach people to do it in university. That's the thing. Like they teach people how to do this, but they made the system so complicated that you need an MBA in order to participate in this market.
Yeah. Now, an MBA is a good place to learn how it works, but now with our new information network, see some of our previous episodes. I'm not going to get into it. You can like learn it yourself. We're not providing financial advice.
Oh yes, disclaimer. Yes, I'm just an idiot on YouTube and on iTunes and stuff.
Yeah.
Do your own research.
Yeah. And just if you understand, press the thumbs up button to show that you understand. Anyway. So yeah, I'll let you go ahead and
So yes, inflation stimulates growth. That's not technically a lie. When the government says that, they mean it. But it's at the cost of consumers, first in high prices and negligible wage increases, if any. It stimulates growth in the sense that money is being paid to people managing empty hotels and award bonuses to management for 10 years leading up to a bubble burst. Money which those individuals likely reinvest and compound for themselves and their personal wealth over the course of 10 years. Again, on the backs of other companies and lenders who are inflating deposit values by generating currency through interest that they charge. Like that's money that didn't exist before they issued the bond, right? Mm-hmm. So inflation does do the things they say, but they don't tell you the cost of inflation, and they don't tell you how they're manipulating the basket of goods in order to get the numbers that they want. And they don't tell you how their reactions with the central bank, which are supposed to be decentralized and separate from the government, that's why they're separate entities, is to make sure that the government doesn't just randomly print money. Like the central bank doesn't ever stop them from issuing bonds. They'll just change the interest rate to change the value of the currency, and it changes other countries' willingness to put their money and investment in our country. Mm-hmm. Because if our currency is dropping, anything they buy in Canadian dollars, like a Canadian stock, even if that stock does well, it's priced in Canadian dollars. So if the Canadian dollar drops, the stock still can still lose money, even though the stock made increases over the year. The stock appreciates in value by 5%, but the currency depreciates in value by 10%. When they buy it back in euros and convert their money, they've lost 5%. Mm-hmm. So currency plays a huge role in what values of markets are because we're globalized. Before we were globalized, it didn't matter. Because even if your valuation went up or down, the only thing that changed was the amount of exports that people could afford. If your currency is really expensive, it's hard for other countries to buy your goods. So exporting countries want a lower currency value. That's why Canada's currency price is always below the States. It's not because our money's worth less or we can't compete or we're trying to catch up. We intentionally keep it lower than the States so that we have a higher American dollar we can buy more goods with our money with, right? Mm-hmm. Because we make a lot of stuff here too. So a huge factor into this whole thing is the exchange of wealth and the movement of money, because that velocity or the actual action of money swashing back and forth in a bucket, just like when you have water in a bucket, it splashes up every time you move it from one side to the other. Like try sitting in a bathtub and moving just a bit to get a little comfortable and not spill all over the edges of the tub. Like a little movement from a big body in a fluid standing dynamic system, it sloshes everything around. And you can consider like a bubble burst or a crash, like a splash. It goes up the side, gets really, really high out of nowhere, and then falls completely straight down, and then just dissolves back into the body of fluid dynamics that's below it, right? Right. Finds its equilibrium price. But if you're constantly adding water, removing water, and moving inside the bathtub, there's no way to actually value or accurately value anything worldwide, because everything's relative to real estate, and real estate's a bubble that they've inflated intentionally across the world through mortgages and lending. So that right there is the reason that no matter where you go in the world, anywhere that there is a property to buy, you've got a manipulated market just from the get-go started, because the banks are all leveraging themselves off of real estate because it's a secure asset everywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. Maybe not Greenland or something, or Denmark. I don't know. Some of those countries are really stingy with how they let property go. But so technically inflation is stimulative, but the cost is paid by the people at the bottom. Well, the price.
Do we actually know? Because that's one of Keynes's old things, is if the government spends money, people have money, and then they'll spend money, and then there'll be money in the market. So like it's not like it makes sense. But how much do we know? Like, do we know this actually works? Is there actual studies showing that if we like how much, if we stimulate public spending, how much that actually has a benefit, like, or does it just sound good and we go along with it because, you know, we're told to do it by a guy with a lot of numbers and a lot of letters behind his name. No, this works. Don't worry. Trust me. Because like that seems to be what it is. Like, trust me, like increasing people spending their money actually will benefit the economy. Will a couple $100,000 per community being flushed into the market, will that be a drop or will that be actually a stimulus from the people? But then, like, do we know the efficacy of, I guess, inflation doing this?
I would suggest I do based on charts, but the actual like technical real value would be impossible to calculate because the value of currency itself changes dynamically too. Mm-hmm. So a screenshot of today will be different from a screenshot of today 5 minutes from now, because all prices of the entire country are changing every second of the day.
Right.
Because values of currencies are changing and swashing around. So there is no point at which you could say this is how rich our country is, unless you take the assumption that you're just picking a random time and date, or you do the same time and date every year, so at least it's consistent. Then you can compare data points like we talked about in our data episode, where everything is relative to the last few points as opposed to being a unit of number on its own. Mm-hmm. So right now what we're doing, if you look at the S&P stock index, if you just type it into Google or whatever, the first thing you'll show, because prices have inflated so much since the property bubbles of like the 70s and 80s, when they started, and then the 90s, they did CMHC so that people of low income could get mortgages to stimulate growth in the economy again. After all the people who could already afford mortgages had them, there was a slowdown. But if you look at the chart, it just goes like, well, I guess my camera's mirrored. So it goes like really, really high in the last 30 years. It spiked.
Oh yeah.
And if you had a real value of a market and we didn't do inflation and we didn't print money and everything was stable, assuming deflation didn't happen, like everything just stagnated and people could save money. If their business was profitable and they had demand, they could grow it with their savings, that kind of thing, right? Like an equilibrium, balanced, productive economy. Our stock market would be decimated. On paper, it would look awful, like the worst crash ever in history, 80% drop down to levels we haven't seen since the 90s, right? But as a matter of quality of life, we would all be fine. We would all have a backup plan. We would all have all the gadgets and discretionary income, because our country would be stable enough that our currency value would be so high that anything we needed, we could buy super cheap from other countries.
Right, and this kind of goes into that saying, the stock market isn't the economy.
Right. So eventually, they would dump their safe money that they want to hold offshore into Canada if we had that stable of an economy. But in doing so, we would have to deny people the right to do that. In order to keep our economy stable and not have an inflated bubble, we'd have to say, you're not allowed to give us money. We'd have to refuse free money that other countries are printing. And that would be the responsible thing to do, because you don't want that liability. That's the whole point.
Right. Unless
sustainability encourages stability, not liability.
Well, unless we have an election year, in which case, you know, we will accept all this free money graciously, because that's what we'll do to get the economy on. And we get, you know, some fool who says literally stuff like, I'm not interested in economics while running this country. Why did I like economics isn't important while being a prime minister? Just no words. And so, you know, we can't really rely on our politicians to handle these decisions. If that nice, it's blue on my screen here, if this thing drops down. Yeah, it's at the S&P right now is at 787.86, and in 95 it was at 533. So there's just.
But what you have to look at is the trajectory. The shape of the graph is more important than the actual numbers.
Yeah, the mean. So the mean, the line of the mean of it is, it goes up and then it kind of goes down, and it kind of goes up and then it goes down, and then you got this new mean at about 2009 where it tanks a bit, and then it just starts gradually growing and it tanks a bit at when COVID hit, and then it just shoots right up.
But the trajectory itself in the long term, if you go back from like 1980, 81, that Google, if you just type in the S&P and go back to 1981, and then you pick the max, you can see how low it was for so long, and then you can see every time there was a government intervention where they spiked up.
Yeah.
But then you can see how much different it is today from 2017, was like 100 years worth of growth and more in multiples of 3. There's no way we grew 3 times bigger than the economy in the 1900s in the span of 2 years. They built highways, they built like railroads, they built tunnels through mountains. Like they were very productive back then. And they had to do it the hardest possible way because they didn't have all the fancy equipment and boring and tractors and mining equipment and stuff, right? But like, so a lot of that growth is because we have machines, but those machines themselves are included in that growth because these companies like Caterpillar are listed on the stock exchange. So it's already accounted for in that graph.
Well, Caterpillar is at least going to try and sell their tractors. They're not going to hold on to their tractors and say, we got assets, because they rely on people actually using their tractors, which is why they put their name on the side of them.
Yeah. And they're one of the best indicators too for future growth in a country. If you look at this real estate model, I don't subscribe to the real estate model, so I don't look at it. But if you think that real estate is always going to go up and it's always going to be great to leverage, and that's the best way to make money, looking at the stock of a construction company who makes machinery, heavy machinery like cranes, is a great way to find out which country is doing the most growing. Because if they're ordering cranes and tractors, it means that soon they're going to have properties that are worth more than they were today.
Well, and the people are going to be employed to use those tractors and cranes, and therefore they're going to have money to spend on things that aren't tractors and cranes, and they're going to want to spend that money on things that aren't tractors or cranes. So,
crucially though, it's the shape of the graphs. It has nothing to do with the numbers on the graphs. It's the shape of the graphs and the patterns and the shapes of the graphs that you want to look at, because that's going to give you all the information you need to know relative to periods of time before and after. Whereas if you just look at the numbers, it means nothing to say something went up or down 3%, because every day that changes.
From like the one I'm looking at, from 2009 to about 2020, it's just this steady growth. But then it drops like that, and then it shoots up like that right after. And I'm like, there's no way we had that much growth since March 2020. Like, that's fake. That can't be real. The economy is not like that right now.
Right. And the charge from 2009 and 10 all the way up to 17 is the same thing. That was quantitative easing and TARP, the toxic asset repurchase program. That was taxpayer money that bought dead debt, which is the same as like a building that couldn't be finished, but they've already taken people's mortgage money for it. Just writing that off and saying that, oh, taxpayers can pay for that. It's the same thing as toxic asset repurchase program that they did to fix the financial crisis.
Quantitative easing?
Quantitative easing is the process of the central bank is issuing money and dumping it straight in the stock market. And then as of March, because they were so worried of COVID, they even loosened the restrictions further to allow the Fed to buy up corporate bonds themselves.
Oh, so
which is insane. You're printing money to buy corporate bonds like that. Absolutely. Remember, we're talking about first access to money. When you increase the supply, it devalues the money, but the first person to spend it gets the full purchasing power of that money. You're giving that directly to the richest people on earth.
Okay. Yeah. So you're essentially subsidizing investment.
Yeah. Who are already too wealthy.
The Romans did this.
Yes, they did.
And the ancient Chinese in the Tang Dynasty did that.
Yeah, so did all the monarchs in France and Britain, and everyone's done it. But that's totalitarianism.
Well, yeah, it wasn't the Republic that did this. It was the late Empire that did this.
The quantitative easing is insane, especially now that they're allowed to dump money directly into corporate bonds. Like, if the government was going to print money to invest in my company, I would be rich too. Every single person in the country would be rich if we got that deal. Like, why would you give it to the singular, most profitable, least productive industry?
Right.
It's just absolutely insane that it's even allowed. Like, it's criminal.
Well,
and they've been doing it nonstop every month since 2008.
Well, and then everyone's complaining that they don't have any money, but then, Yeah, and so like they say, well, we're gonna help the little guy out. We're gonna give money, blah blah blah, and then no one gets any help from the government except for the people at top. Meanwhile, businesses are shutting, like actual people working are shutting down, while the
But
people
they're getting bought out by the competition who gets
and it's like
preferential
with
treatment
COVID,
from the
it's
government.
even worse because you have these big box companies are they're not only getting subsidies to stay open because COVID's hurting them, but they're pushing these smaller guys who have been working to create, maybe they got 2-3 stores in a city and they're being told to close to not work, and then at the same time not getting subsidies. Well, they're getting CPAC or not CPAC or whatever the like they're getting a pittance in response, and then
And they're asking them to pay out their labor anyway.
while Superstore stays open. So you have a meat market that is forced to close. Like there's a German food store here which was closed for a couple months while its direct competitors, Safeway, Save On Foods, and like all the Loblaws things were like, oh no, we're too important, we have to stay open. Like that's now then, like you might end up seeing the same thing in the food market that you're seeing in the housing
They sort of do that because it's visible, right? That's stuff that they can put in the news that people understand. They understand shuttered doors and locked windows and things like that, right? But what they don't understand is how their RRSPs might be contributing to an ETF that's got a holdings company under an umbrella corporation of Evergrande's debt. Like,
Yeah.
they have no idea where their retirement money goes in their RRSP.
Yeah.
And they can use an RRSP themselves to also leverage into buying a new home based on the security and viability of registered retirement savings
Right.
plans.
Wasn't the Americans' retirement plans wrapped up in this? Or is
Yeah,
that
so
just-
are ours. Everybody in the world's is.
I'm self-employed, so
Yeah. But your old age contribution at the end of your life, or in your 70 and older, you get an old age subsidy or whatever, that comes out of that.
Yeah.
Your healthcare expenses come out of that.
I think they've already spent that though.
They have. That's why they keep printing money.
Yeah, this is going so okay. Let's this is fascinating, but
Oh, it is. I love this shit.
But okay, so if they keep printing money and they keep making my money, my dollar, my loonie worth, less, my toonie's worth a loonie now. Is no inflation, if we like outlaw inflation, is that like if we outlaw intentional inflation, not like natural inflation, like, oh boy, we just did business and now our goods are worth this.
Yeah. Or it snowed a lot and it was hard to get all the wood here, so it costs a bit more for wood. That
Yeah.
totally makes sense. That's not
Yeah.
even inflation. That's just prices.
Yeah. So if we let supply and, what was it, the God ordained laws of supply and demand just take their course and didn't
That's free marketism.
Oh no, I'm a fascist.
No, everybody claims they love free markets, and then all they do is turn around and manipulate them because they're like, I want a trade deal, I want a tariff, I want a tax incentive, I want a subsidy, I want a rebate. And you're like, none of that is free market. So stop saying that you're in favor of a free market.
Well, this is why I kind of fell in love with capitalism, but didn't change my views on corporatism.
Yeah.
And once I learned how capitalism was supposed to work, I was just like, oh.
But
okay,
again, if the government,
complicated, but
if by birth, with your birth certificate, you got an incorporated a corporation under your birth certificate registration number, let's say, so everybody got the same benefits of corporations, there would be no problem. It would just be complicated. It would be needlessly complicated, but everybody would be on a even playing field right from the day they're born.
Well, complexity can be solved with education.
Yeah.
Well, to some extent. Some people are going to have harder time than
corporatism
others.
is you're priced out of the market. You can only afford the consultant, the $20,000 consulting fees and the $4 million accounting fees if you have $1 billion of assets under management.
Mm-hmm.
It's the scales that are problematic. So if I want to incorporate a company, I spend $1,000. I can either spend that on a credit card that charges me 18%, or if I'm a developer, the bank will pay me to lend money out. Like, which is fair? I'm actually working and trying to produce something, and they're already getting the benefit that I'm trying to save up and pay for on a loan. Just to get the tax incentives as a corporation, I have to pay money and I have to borrow money to get that.
So do we make it harder for Ottawa to issue money, but then that doesn't stop Evergrande from coming in? Well, but if we stop Chinese investment, then we lose Chinese investment.
Right. And then every country looks at you like, oh, any day now they could just like pull the plug and my investment. And so every country backs off from you.
And like every country looks at Trudeau like, oh, he's growing a little mustache there. Like,
yeah, that's a serious concern too. So you actually have to dance the same dance that everyone else in the world is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's doing it slightly different, but they're all trying to find a consensus. And that's what the globalization is finding that consensus. So every now and then you'll get a trade deal that says like no taxes on wood or softwood lumber going to the States, or coal coming from Australia to China. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have a climate ban or something that has that taxes carbon emissions. Or you have a dispute with Taiwan, and Australia has a dispute with like France over nuclear submarines.
Poor sailors stuck off the coast for a year.
But stuff constantly happens. So that's proof that forcing inflation is a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Because forcing inflation makes an assumption that we know patently false. Well, so to use that assumption is obviously false. But we do it because everybody else is doing it. And that's how we can value our currency relative to them as long as our rules are similar. But that's not in everyone's best benefit. That's not what benefits people. What benefits people is if productivity is distributed based on merit, based on what people earn. If somebody is a really productive hot dog maker, they should be a millionaire. They should absolutely be a millionaire if they're really good at operating carts across the city.
Right.
But you can't.
And if they get their hot dog maker up to scale, what's wrong with him being a billionaire?
Exactly. Nobody's against making money with a free market. But as soon as you start manipulating the market, like setting overnight interest rates and stuff like that, which directly affect the investments which everybody's livelihoods depend on, whether it's the company's cash flow because they're all pushing for tomorrow's growth, none of them have active cash flow, just-in-time supply chains. The reason why we don't have enough supply of like Lysol wipes or something when COVID hits, or everybody freaks out and buys toilet paper, is because we don't store inventory. Because holding a warehouse full of inventory just to have a safe backup plan is expensive. But it's not that expensive. We have tons of open land. We can absolutely warehouse extra stuff. But we don't because we're beholden to our shareholders who are beholden to bigger numbers. It's our deft focus on this growth model, as if growth is the be-all, end-all of all things. If your country's shrinking, you don't want growth, because that's excess, and excess means waste, and waste means waste management, which costs money. You don't want to build stuff you have to throw out because it costs you money to dump it.
Right. And, well, it's a lot of these, like, to me, it seems that from where I've been living, like, excessive growth can actually be a detriment. Like, I remember in 2009, Manitoba, like the prairie provinces handled the crash a lot better because they hadn't been excessively growing. They had been, steadily growing.
Yeah,
and
they were much more measured in their approach.
And like, you're not going to stop growth. Like, growth is going to happen. Like, and if you're having the opposite of growth, if your economy is shrinking, well, it's a good sign that something's not right in your economy. Education,
healthcare, access to food. That's the only thing that'll stop growth because people are just born to grow. That's how humans subsist.
I don't know. There's a massive drought and maybe, well, why are we having a drought? Well, because we're farming badly. Oh, why are we farming badly? Well, okay. Well, we have to
look how much energy and effort the Netherlands put into irrigation.
Yeah.
Like, if we have problems with drought or floods, we could fix it. It would just take labor. That's it. It would cost money that we're paying bankers right now. That's it. We'd have the same standard of living, the same quality of life. The only difference is somebody wouldn't be making money hand over fist on our labor for doing nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you put that money towards the things that actually cost us money, like irrigation and planning for climate change, we don't lose anything. It costs us nothing, and we're prepared. And being prepared, like the Mormons were before Hurricane Katrina, like FEMA took weeks or months to get to New Orleans, and like the Mormons were there overnight because they're worried about the end of the world. They've already got a warehouse full of food and full of clothing and full of blankets and bedding.
As much as weird as they are, the religion does preach like people are in need, go help them.
And these are the types of reasons that religions persist too, is because they don't just help in the community with like, community stuff like we talked about in our prior episodes. Mm-hmm. They also help weather like storms, literally storms.
Well, you're practicing faith. You do need some amount of faith in the economy. Like, I have to have faith that, well, if the economy dies, I'm dead too, I guess. Like, if it just completely destroys itself.
The business of churches, they don't sell just-in-time supply chains, right? They are their own service. They produce their own good, and they accumulate dollars from donations, and they stockpile it for tomorrow because they don't know for sure they're getting income. They're not paid, they get donations. So they actually have to plan for droughts in income.
Yeah.
So churches are really responsible with their money.
Good churches.
For the most part. I mean, those super evangelicals that make millions are a different story entirely. That's just a states thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple up here too, but
yeah, but they make a couple million. Like, it's no big deal. It's the drop in the bucket. But the ones in the States are making hundreds of millions. Like, they're part of like this Evergrande problem.
But you're also showing someone like they're selling their product. They're not just leveraging nothing, like some absolute, like, I guess they're leveraging faith, but at the same time, we don't actually know what's going on metaphysically. But
they're offering like a building for people to shelter in. They're offering a stockpile of like childcare services and food supplies and drinking water and like practical things, just religion aside, faith aside, and like humanity aside. Economically speaking, churches are more productive than most banks. Like, literally.
Well, that's going to be the quote on the head.
Yeah.
Kris Driver. Economically speaking, churches are more productive than banks.
Because they provide something and banks don't. They issue money that other people gave them. They didn't do anything. Any idiot could take money in one hand and then hand it out to somebody else and then take more back from both people. Nobody, that's not beyond anybody's comprehension. Children can do this. Like, children can take a cookie from a friend and then owe them 2 cookies tomorrow. It's how they've made this so convoluted and structured it so like to systematically exploit people under the table so that it's less visible, and then to cover that with something that is visible, like a number that keeps going up, and everybody understands bigger numbers are bigger than smaller numbers. But to oversimplify the markets the way they do in the news, that's the biggest detriment to our country, is the way reporters are reporting on financial matters in the country. None of them go into detail about the basket of goods or the recalculation or the recalibration of the purchasing price index. None of them say, like, this is exactly how CPI factored into inflation this year, because every year it changes. None of them say why the governments and what the governments are doing and why the governments are promoting a 2% instead of a 3% interest rate. Or inflation rate. Well,
and all of that's done when it is reported. It's like, oh, there's a 2% interest rate, and then like
they just say it like it's fact, but it's not.
They say it like it's fact, and then like, the implication is, trust me on this one.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's complicated. Don't worry.
Like, you do your thing, I'll do mine. I don't pump gas. That's your job. It's like, wow. But it's
a problem of compounding and people's innate inability to grasp exponentiation. The reason why people are anti-vaxxers during a pandemic is because they don't understand the scope and scale of exponentiation. That's fundamentally what information is being exploited when we employ these type of tactics in the fiscal imprudence, I would call it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what can we do about it? Because like, there's 2 things I want to get into. One of them was what we can do about it, and the next is probably mythology, but what can we expect? Because like, anyone tells you, honestly, what's going to happen
what we
next.
Can do about it, I am grasping at straws like pushing string up a waterfall. Like, I write books and make music and do podcasts and do graphic. Like, I'm trying to scream it out to the world because I don't know what to do. I honestly don't know how to fix this without everybody's involvement. And to me, the only way people can even begin to analyze it and object to it is if they understand it. So I'm trying to explain the faults in the systems of the world through every medium that I'm capable of doing, in order to just enable people to have a conversation that needs to be had, so that eventually down the line, there will be enough support to change the system for the better by somebody smarter than me.
Yeah.
I
guess
honestly
you can talk
know.
to your, well, I guess the first thing is get educated. Second thing is, when there's a local election, literally sit down and talk to the guy. It's like, well, what do you think about increasing like inflation rate? And he'll be like, well, the first thing we need to do is print money. And it's just like, okay, I'm not voting for you.
The first thing is to educate our politicians. They have no idea.
No, well, when our politician goes up,
any idea of what we were talking about today.
When our prime minister literally goes into a debate and starts campaigning saying the economy isn't important and it's not what he's interested in. Like, I'm interested in other things. The economy is small. Like, no, the economy is.
It's how we get other things.
Yes.
Like, you can't do other things without a functioning economy.
Like, the economy is what allows us to do all that social stuff. Yeah. And when it's functioning, then we don't, like, a functioning economy is one that you don't notice. It's one that's just like, I can just go to the store and buy my microphone and my webcam, and I don't notice it because
it doesn't blow up, it doesn't crash, prices don't change.
But I like, it doesn't put me out, and I'm like, I can try a new project, and now we're started this project. We don't notice it, but like we are noticing the economy, which means there's something wrong with it. And when we can focus on inane social problems, it's probably a good sign. But it's
but the harsh reality is, like, if I gave people advice like don't invest in the real estate market because it's a bubble, they will lose a huge amount of quality of life over the span of their lifetimes because of how much money there is to be generated in it. And being left out doesn't fix the problem. So might as well have everybody involved in it, because then at least you're distributing those resources, right?
Well, and a lot of people.
But my bad advice would be to buy up the shit that I'm telling you is garbage. Like, that's how you fix the problem, is if everybody owned stock and everybody had a portfolio. That would be one fix to the problem. Another would be every human should have corporation rights.
No, I've
corporations should not have more rights than human beings.
What does this mean? Because we make corporations people, but what are we doing when we're making people corporations?
We set up a corporation as a legal entity, right?
Right.
The human being is also a legal entity. So you can create a corporation that commits a crime just like you can make a baby that grows up and commits a crime. But the difference is a corporation doesn't go to jail.
Well, because
a human being loses the freedom and quality of life and enjoyment and all the experiential things, the intangibles, the qualia of life is lost. That's a cost that a human being pays for breaking the rules. Right. But if a human being sets up a corporation and a corporation kills hundreds of thousands of people through an opioid crisis, and the individuals profit from it, there is no way to put a company in jail. They just go bankrupt. The name just gets written off, and they just scribble it on a piece of paper and file it in court.
Yeah, you get like Chiquita Banana, who used to be United Fruit, and go look it up on Wikipedia. It's nasty.
Banana Republic, baby.
Yeah. And so if you make a person a corporation, people can invest directly into them instead of. Am I off base or something here?
It doesn't matter how you do it. The point is, a human being has to have more rights than a company. Mm-hmm. If a company does something illegal or wrong, there should be more severe punishment than a human being, because they have more controls in place and they should be responsible enough to set up prevention methods. But fining a bank like HSBC for laundering money for coke dealers, fining them $100,000 when they made $20 million is retarded.
Yeah, it becomes an expense.
Yeah, it's not even, it gets, like Apple, it's the same thing with their, like, product manufacturers, not just banks, but like people who produce products, SNC Lavalin even, for engineering companies. Like, this happens all over the corporate world in the largest blue chip stocks, where there's like Deutsche Bank's fraud or UBS's frauds, or Wells Fargo that just invented accounts and charged all their customers for products and instruments they never tried to buy. So the ones that didn't notice they were being charged for like 10 years were paying for a fraud detection service that the government mandates for free. They're paying $25 a month for fraud protection. Like, and I know these exist because I actually worked at Chase Bank, and my NDA is up because it's been 10 years. So bye, Chase. Yeah, like,
but I'm just wondering,
it's not just the banking sector, and it's not the stock market's problem. It's the rules of the market. It's the rules of incorporation that's the problem. So whether you give people a company when they're born, and then they get to, all of their misdeeds go under that company name, at least you've leveled the playing field, right? Or if you have a property bubble, right? If every single person in the country has a piece of that property bubble, It's spread evenly. The burden's not paid by the least able to pay it the way it is now. Right now, the people who benefit are the ones who have exclusive access to the market and are in the least need of earning income. Mm-hmm. Those people get the biggest access to the largest growth of wealth, while everybody else doesn't. But if everybody else also had a piece of that stock when it blew up, everybody would be rich enough to handle the crisis. So it's more to do with leveling things than it is to actually changing the rules to make it better. Whatever the rules are now, just extend those rules to everybody else. If you don't make enough to pay for the transfer fees to buy a stock, your fee should be paid by a hedge fund. Like it should be free to buy stock in your own country if your country is also taxpayers' money subsidizing that country.
Right.
You shouldn't be charged a fee that you're not even able to pay.
Well, that recommendation you just came with there, like you should be free to buy stock in your own country. That's a good start. I mean, like that's a good point that you could actually talk about in a debate on how to, stabilize or actually make the market more effective at what it's doing. Because the thing is that the market on its own, the market isn't its own thing. It exists with recourse to humanity. Problem is that in these very real problems with it and how it interacts with the real world, it screws up and it's just some shady stuff. But a lot of what happens is when we ask the question, well, what do you do to deal with it? People go, well, kill the bankers. It's just like, whoa, no, okay. And there's a lot of overreaction, and you get, they become scapegoats, and it ends up being the response ends up having no bearing on the actual reality of the situation. You get something like in Nazi Germany where they're like, well, the Jews did it. Yeah. No, it's not the Jews.
But what they'll do though is they'll invent a crisis. They'll start a war, and then they'll blame everything on the war. That's how wars start now. It's not even because we're in conflict or we're trying to protect people.
Literally how World War II started. Like they blame someone to start a war so that they can take stuff and reboot their economy.
9/11 just happened to happen right after the financial or the .com bubble burst. Like, what are the odds?
Well, I don't want to go too conspiratorial because
I'm not saying they caused it, but what I'm saying is going to war over 9/11 was absolutely influenced by the stock market and a distraction for political gain. It absolutely was. You can tell because George Bush turned around an aircraft carrier just to take a photo shoot.
Yeah, mission accomplished.
Yeah, it wasn't even hidden. They're so blatant about their Hollywoodism in America that they don't even hide the fact that they do things against the public interest for political gain as just a publicity stunt. But every country does it. Absolutely every country. And a war is the easiest distraction from a really bad system because it's much harder to change the system because the political donations, the whole reason these people get into power and make money for themselves, because like politicians do inside trading, like that's totally legal.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talk about Pelosi right now, where her money's coming from. Like,
but this has been forever. They've always been allowed to own stocks and things, and they're part of the financial committee that's regulating them and like punishing them. And you know what I mean?
This is like you get stuff like in Romania where the person in charge of the country, or is it the economy, is in charge of the investigation against her.
Yeah. And that right there is a systemic problem that I keep trying to bring up in all these different ways. And it's it's not that the rules are bad. It's that the rules need to be equitably distributed. They need to be evenly applied across all people.
A lot of
if somebody's trading $100,000 worth of stock, they can afford a higher trade price than somebody who's buying one stock at $5.
Right.
So you shouldn't charge the same fee to both people for one stock, and 100,000 stock purchases is a flat fee. That's ridiculous. Just things like that. Make the rules actually reflective of the work and input that's being contributed.
There's a lot of little mechanisms that we can incorporate, and like some of them have been done. Like there's one in Canada which it's so mundane, it's so stupid, and like we're not, just because we have the stock. I think one of the things is the stock market is the way it is, and we've got this finely tuned machine, and you really have to know all the ins and outs. But no, we can invent new mechanisms for this machine as we go. Like one of the things Canada did was it made it free for citizens and people in the country to pass money from bank to bank. So one of the things I do is I get paid through e-transfer. In Canada, that's free. In the States, you can't do that for free, which limits the amount of, it puts almost a tax on being in business. In Canada, it substantially eases the way people can engage in commerce with each other. You're not putting a barrier. You're actually allowing commerce by allowing people to transfer money from one person to another for free. It's so mundane. It's so stupid, but like
that's stimulative.
Yes.
That's very stimulative. You're right. And little things like that that could change easily. Just conflicts of interest. Having one unbiased third party participant in any conflict of interest makes total sense. And they apply it to you and I if we go to a job and you and I are a magistrate or a laborer or some union worker or something. You'll constantly have a conflict of interest where you have to recuse yourself. But in government, they don't. In finance, they don't. In banking, they don't. All they have to do is pay somebody to be their third party interest, like an accounting auditing firm or a legal firm that says, oh, I'm an independent lawyer holding money in escrow. No, you're my lawyer. I paid you.
Yeah.
So the ratings agency is another, like banks are paying the agencies that rate their viability. That's ridiculous. But like the more services you pay from them, like just other services unrelated to the ratings, the more likely they're going to help you get rated. Or like just getting listed in the stock exchange, you have to be approved by some like cabal of administrators, and you have to pay them and schmooze them and expense account them with private jets and.
Yeah, and then they'll be like, I guess I can let you in, because we can't have
we'll let you ring the bell
around with money, because there's that expectation that the small person, the small business owner, can't be trusted with these big financial decisions, when like the ingenuity that it takes to actually run a small business is like that you have to put a lot of thought and a lot of work into starting up like a restaurant or something, and those people have a lot of expertise, and they just be like, well, no, it's a smaller type of expertise. It's like, no, if we democratize the market, like what you said, you should be able to buy bonds. Like if we incorporate everyone, and that gives you, yes, everyone can be charged, and you have, this provides actual negative benefits for people, for large corporations. But if that gives them privileges of something like they're allowed to trade freely in the market because everyone's incorporated or something, and you could trade maybe because everyone's automatically incorporated, you could automatically trade shares in any business venture that you start, allowing for people to just go, and you get that corporate like there would have to be like rules so that you don't like sign it away accidentally.
No,
and like
you could incentivize your employees by issuing shares to employees, like profit sharing to employees, rather than giving them raises. Say, hey, the more money this company makes, the more money all of us make. Here's the exact proportion of how much of our profit you will make if you help my business grow. Like profit sharing alone would make everybody motivated to even work at McDonald's, to make that McDonald's super profitable, so that you get at the end of a year like a $5,000 bonus.
Right, an actual profit
you're
sharing.
getting paid more.
Yeah. So
but then that money can compound. If you stay in one job for 5 years, you've helped grow the business for 5 years. If you keep rolling over your dividend income from the profit share every year, you can buy a house in 5 years without even trying to save. Like you go about your daily life, and every time you get a yearly bonus, you just buy more of your own company stock and you work your butt off. You get the same raises you would have got otherwise. The only difference is the company owners, instead of making $850,000, they make $500,000.
Right, and this is actually what the communists want. Like it's not communism because everyone's engaging in the market, but everyone has an interest in the market that they're working in. It's not just like, well, I work, I get paid. You're a cog. Like you're a cog at living in a society that allows you to have stuff like a fridge, but you're like, it doesn't feel good. Now, to be fair, this would also allow people who aren't good with finances to just, well, I just want to be a cog. I'm just going to live my life in janitorial, like it up because, that's what I'm good at. It's like fair. But for those of us who want to, well, we need those. And like a lot of people are just, okay, just give me a job and I'll be fine. But a lot of us can actually engage in growth. And this is why we talk about capitalism so much, because if all of us have the freedom to, leverage our effort and actually put our effort into society, then, it's that growth will actually happen, and that growth will actually be real growth, because we'll actually be producing and selling the stuff that we're making. Not just
and that's what's crucial too, is like to think that capitalism could just go away and socialism means like the bad socialism. To say that would work better sort of implies that, the microphone that I'm recording this on was built by slave labor. The monitors that I'm using on my computer was built by slave labor. Like the monitor stand I have, the desk I got from IKEA, particle board that was pressed by slave labor and machines. Yeah. All of the components in my computer and everything I'm using right now to do free stuff, which is socialist in nature, like I'm promoting socialism, stems from all the benefits and sweat and toil from capitalism and exploitation. So I'm not saying capitalism is bad, but what I'm saying is we don't need 10 TVs in every house. We don't need 3 cars in every driveway. We don't need 5 different video game consoles. And we certainly don't need our rights being owned by companies that aren't accountable to the justice system. The least they could do is make companies accountable to the justice system. If you can't ruin somebody's life, like sending them to jail, you should ruin them with a crippling fine. A crippling fine, not like 1% of the money they stole from other people, like 500% of all the money they stole over all the years that they stole it.
Well, you earn money illegally. Like if you steal money, like if you literally go up and like steal money, they confiscate that money and give it back.
Unless you're a bank.
And so like if I go up to a like a hot dog stand and I go like,
give me all your money.
Yeah, and I just they give me all their money and I make $500 and I'm like, yeah, and so I've leveraged my tendency for violence to perform a transaction that's in my favor. And so but then I have to give it back. And so, you have, but we just lied to them, says Apple. But then you have people that actually steal, and then they're like, well, prove I stole the money. You don't know how the market works. Well, actually, it's this.
But even with proof, knowingly, they fine them less than the money they stole.
Right.
With the proof, like intentionally, explicitly, without hiding it. They just say, here's the fine based on the evidence. And the evidence says $1 million collected. The fine says $100,000 fine. And it's not just once. It's JP Morgan, it's Goldman Sachs, it's Wells Fargo, Bank of America has been involved, HSBC in Canada has been involved, Scotiabank has been involved in some terrible stuff down in Brazil, I think. It's either Bank of Nova Scotia or TD, I can't remember exactly. But anyways, banks in Europe even, like UBS and Deutsche Bank, are notorious for really bad fraud and bad loans and misstatements on their financial reports and doing faulty audits. All of that kind of stuff just needs to be punished as if they were human beings. Because if a human being can lose their entire life, all of the productivity of their life and all of their possessions because they're locked in jail and their freedom, a company should be just as crippled for committing the same crime.
Well, and we have a good example of what happens when we don't punish them like that, because of what happened after the crisis in 2009, that housing market crash. Was the people who ended up screwing up our society got money for doing it, and we're ending up where the economy didn't get better from it. We ended up with the same problems that we had before, and we can see in real time what's happening when we subsidize this type of behavior.
More poverty and more billionaires. We've never had so many millionaires in the entire history of the world, and we've never had so much poverty next to them.
But like
relative poverty.
Well, it's relative poverty.
Not abject poverty, but relative poverty means I can't afford a $500 healthcare bill in the States.
And
in Canada, there's no savings. So even if we don't have to pay for healthcare, not having savings is a huge problem.
Right. And
so fix a leaky roof, your house breaks and it gets worse.
Well, and we have repercussions in this when they're telling us that we have to stay at home and go into lockdown, but then not all of us have to go into lockdown. Like, oh, well, I have I'm a big financial guru and I can just go wherever the heck I want because my job is important. It's like, and mine isn't. Like, and so like, who decides this? Well, I do.
That's to mitigate transmission of a virus, though. It's a bit
right.
different.
But it's the thing is that it's, if they're locking me down, but you can just get out of it because you're in finance or, something like that. That's shows that like they're allowing themselves to play by different rules.
To me, the better solution would be to give finance jobs to the people who have lost their jobs. Like spread that work around. If there are people working in banking making 200 grand sitting at home, take some of that work away and give it to somebody else, or just give the money to other people. Like, better they work for it. So it makes more sense to take the labor off their shoulders. But what I'm saying is their jobs aren't productive. They're doing things that computers do for them. What they're paid for is their knowledge. So if we have an educated society and everybody understands how the financial system works, we would be able to just trade those types of duties around to other people who need money. They should be able to go to the government and say, hey, I lost my job. And instead of going on EIA insurance right away, employment insurance, they should say, hey, we got a finance job for you. You can recalculate our next year's budgets for X and X boony city, because small cities don't have as easy access to accountants, let's say. So you could be doing like municipal budgets for boony towns and then get paid for actually doing work instead of being paid for an insurance, which isn't productive at all. It takes money out of the pool of insurance, which makes everybody less insured.
Right. I think that a lot of, like, honestly, if we just give them proper competition, like you said, if we give people the ability to just work in the stock market and lower the
barriers to entry.
Lower the barriers to entry. And I think that would do a lot to equalize our society quite a bit.
Absolutely.
And then
that's
you'd
why
get
I was
more
so
people
into
working
Forex trading, because that's what it was for me. Currencies are open to absolutely anybody. You could just open an account and start leveraging 100 to 1. It's beautiful.
So I think last thing I'm going to ask is, are we screwed?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Tell me why then.
Because we have institutions of education, we have access to communication like the internet, which gives us access to education. And we now have an archive and a stockpile of videos made by content creators across the world. So even if the internet died tomorrow, that stockpile of videos would still exist and data costs almost nothing. Hard drive space is super cheap. We've got fiber optic transmissions around the world. Everybody will always have access to education in some form or another if the government wants it. So all we need is a government that encourages education, and we need people who are motivated personally and individually to be educated. That would fix all of our problems in the long run, but there is no quick fix. There's no silver bullet that'll fix all these problems. The easiest way to start would be to just equalize the playing field, make markets accessible to the people who make the markets. The reason a stock has any value is because the employees all collectively made that company worth the stock. There's no reason they should be excluded from owning or trading shares in the marketplace that they've created.
Right. And I think for us to, well, if we get more educated, we can see through their BS, but
that's the other thing. We'll make educated decisions.
Right. But the thing is that like their BS, government and corporate BS, is very complicated. And like, if you're not paying attention or if you're tired that day, it'll get you and you might end up at war with China or something. And the thing is that I think one of the things we can do as citizens is keep them from talking on stupid subjects. When there's an election and they stop and they say, well, the economy isn't important. No, get them talking about the important, get them talking about what the spending is, get them to show their numbers. This will help old people. Yes, I have a stimulus for old people so that they'll vote for me. And I have a stimulus for this type of people. And, we need more money to trans people. It's like, no. People are people. And so you get them talking about policy and about economic policy. And if they don't understand economic policy, don't vote for them. Like, doesn't matter the party.
Also shouldn't tolerate the jobs thing. It's not the government's job to create jobs.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with government. Absolutely nothing to do with government creating jobs. I can't stress that loudly enough. Every single time you hear a politician say, we're going to do this and it's going to create jobs, they're lying. That's not their mandate. That's not what they're there for. They're there to govern the resources that they have. They're there to move tax money and incentivize things through subsidies that are good for the entire population.
Yeah.
Like food supply chains and disaster relief and medical expenses and infrastructure investment, that kind of thing. Creating jobs has nothing to do with the government. Like, you want to create a job, start a small business. You want to help promote small business, educate people, period. You don't actually start the business for people and then make the jobs and make a make-work project just to spend money.
Right, because
it's not helpful.
You're telling people you don't have to work. Here's a restaurant. You don't have to work. Here's a distribution business. So you don't have to work. Here's a truck.
Yeah, and then they're saying we don't have enough money to do this for everybody. And it's like, obviously, of course you don't have enough money to pay everybody for doing nothing. Like,
yeah,
it's not more complicated than that, though. Like, honestly, if politicians are focused on creating jobs, what they're doing is borrowing money today that you have to repay tomorrow with your tax money so that they can create a job that's not productive. If it was a productive job, somebody would just start a business and they would hire people and they would start creating jobs, not the government.
Well, and then you wouldn't be allowing to make people to make their mistakes and learn to make a better job, because it's just like, oh, here's the truck you needed. Well, no, you need to actually work for that truck, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes working for that truck and getting into that thing. And you're going to learn a lot of experience earning the truck to start your own trucking business. Mm-hmm. And once you get that trucking business, you're going to make a lot of better decisions, because that's going to be education. Yeah. And like, how do I stop for gas? I don't know, all the things, a little minutia of the job that you need to learn. But if you just give someone a job, guess how good they're going to be at that job if you start somebody at level 10.
And look how expensive it'll be. Like, if you can help 30,000 people with $1 with like a pamphlet or something that gets them into a free online course. Like, there are university courses you can take online with pre-recorded lectures. Like, you don't even need a professor anymore if you want to learn something. You can just promote education, not the institution of education, but if governments promoted real live education, they could fix a lot of the country's problem just based on people's awareness of the world around themselves.
Yeah.
Like, when I moved to BC, I didn't even know what a condo was, and I became a condo manager. I couldn't have possibly dreamed of being a condo manager in a place that didn't have condos, because I didn't know the job existed. I didn't know what it entailed. I didn't know what the legal structures were. I didn't know there were no acts or laws that were governing it. There's no licensing requirement in Manitoba. In BC, I had to learn a lot of stuff from the ground up just to manage condos, which is an entry-level management job. Mm-hmm. So not being aware of the world limits your potential, because you don't even know what to stretch out to.
Well, the stupid part of it is, and we're kind of getting off the, I think, point, but like, you can educate yourself, and if you can produce in a field an original work, an example of work or something, a paper, and then submit that as an equivalent for a bachelor degree, because of stuff you've learned, you just did the reading, you did all the work and stuff like that, you did all your own research, and you show up with a paper going like, is this good enough to get me a bachelor degree, or, you know, do I need to retool it because, you know, that's my thesis, take it. And then, or you just you become an expert in the field because you have access to libraries and online content, and you start like talking online, and all of a sudden, if you are good enough at it, you start getting honorary degrees. F you. Sorry, as a guy who earned mine.
That to me is more helpful than the practice of trying to create jobs by having like safety departments and, you know, inspectors that are unlicensed or ungovernable types of offenses. Like, what do you call that? Shit, I'm having a brain fart. I think we've been going too long.
Yeah, I think I'm slowly been trying to wrap up, but yeah.
But yeah. Oh, just to answer your question, I think there is one silver bullet that you can do to get involved if you just want to get started and make money and not be victimized. You can start trading currencies. And I only say that because your margin requirements are less than $1,000, so anybody can save up for it, even on minimum wage, like I did as a teenager.
Yeah, I remember that.
Anybody can open an account. And if you educate yourself and practice enough without real money, because you can open a practice account and trade actively on daily markets, but minute by minute markets, but without your real money. After you practice a bit and you've gained some tricks and strategies that help you, you'll figure out your own tolerance for risk, and you can make your own investment portfolio, even if it's just like a $500-600, or just the active engaging process of learning and following markets is hugely beneficial, because it carries through with you for the rest of your life, the things that you pick up and learn from watching the markets actually move.
Yeah, and you can
not only
start
that,
to hear their bullshit.
Yeah, but you're actively managing your own. You don't have to pay somebody else fees to manage your own investment fund, right?
Right.
I wouldn't suggest anybody ever put all of their money into Forex, because it's a super high risk. It's extremely close to gambling. Like, the success rates on it is like 51% if you're, but that's enough in investing as long as averages work in your favor, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a successful trader will get around 70 to 80% right. So when you're hedging your downside and you're maximizing your upsides, everybody in the world with an internet connection and a laptop can trade currencies and make money the way rich people make money. Instead of trying to make money selling your life for hours per dollar, you can make money compounding it with leverage. So Forex markets are excellent for that. If nothing else, just the education. If you do the practice accounts, watching how markets move and then seeing things on the news and then seeing how markets move is not just fascinating if you're into it, but like it really puts into context everything that you're hearing from politicians who aren't watching markets that way. So I think it extends to everything from your business to your financial life, your aptitude for reading bullshit, and also for who you elect and your political penchants, shall we say.
Yeah. And
So yeah, with that, I'll wrap up.
So yeah, interest. Not
we might need a part 2 to this, because we didn't even really talk about bond structures and yields. And
well, we got
we'll
lots
have
of
to wait
time.
a bit.
Yeah. So short story. That's why inflation is theft.
Yes.
Thank you guys for
inflation
watching.
is fine on its own. It's just that manipulated inflation, that forced inflation, the engineered inflation is bad.
Yeah, when they're printing money.
Yes.
Taken away from you.
Yes. Erosion of wealth. Anyway, what was that quote? We should end on that quote again. Economically speaking, churches are more productive than banks. Something.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna write that one down. Anyway, thanks for listening to Frivolous Gravitas. Myself, Christopher Driver, and as always, the super cool and casual Mr. Jordan Roy.
Oh, I'm casual now.
Super casual. Uber cash, as the kids say.
They don't say that, do they?
No.
Okay, bye guys.